there's one thing everyone needs, and I'm sure that you will all agree that in the end it comes down to energy. If you got some, put some effort in now, 'cause whatever it is won't be hanging around. Gotta put it in a bottle and store it any way you can. Catch and store energy every day, any way that you can with care. Catch and store energy every day, any way that you can while it's there. And make some hay, 'cause you might just only have today to do it. And when there's more, don't keep it all yourself. Give some to a friend with room on their shelf, 'cause the best way to generate energy is to keep it moving. Yeah, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can with care. Store energy every day, any way that you can while it's there. Ooh, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can for later on. Yeah, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can before it's gone. It won't be long before I grow old and this energy will be gone, so I'd better find a way to pass it on. When you're coming inside at the end of the season, preserve all your surplus and save all your seeds, and reserve as much as you can for later on. Every day, any way that you can with care. Yeah, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can while it's there. Ooh, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can for later on. Yeah, catch and store energy every day, any way that you can before it's gone.
Welcome to Bread Theory. I am Zach, and tonight we're going to go on another journey learning about permaculture. I have for you tonight an excellent video on the Bullock brothers. They're permaculture practitioners, live out on Orcas Island in Washington State, and they have a homestead there that they tried a lot of techniques on and had a lot of time to really observe and interact with the land. So we're going to watch that one tonight and perhaps get into another one. The first video is only half an hour long, so there's a good chance we'll get to the second one. And if that's the case, we'll be getting into some Sepp Holzer permaculture, another famous permaculturist from, I believe it was from Austria. But anyway, before we get to that, I am going to put in a little plug for the Lefty Awards that my group on Facebook is doing. So 1 second there, and I'll pull that up. Okay. So, my group on Facebook, Left Signal Boost, is holding our second annual Lefties Award Show, and it's to kind of celebrate and to highlight leftist creators from across the spectrum of platforms. So, everything from Twitch to YouTube to visual artists, movies. Basically, if it's a medium that you can be creative in, there's an award for it. And right now, the nomination process is open to anyone who's a member of Left Signal Boost. All you have to do is go to Facebook, join Left Signal Boost, and make sure that your favorite creators get nominated for the recognition that they deserve. And voting will start on November 1st, and we'll end up having the award show on the day after U.S. Thanksgiving, right here on Bread Theory. And we're going to have, special guests. We're going to have a good time taking a look at all the different nominees. Every single nominee, regardless of the outcome of the vote, will get a little clip of their work played on award night, just as our way to get more eyes on leftist creators, be they big or small. So please come on over to Left Signal Boost and cast your nominations and soon to be your votes for your favorite leftist creators of 2021. All right, so with that out of the way, I think we can move into the video. Let me just cue that up right now. Where are we at? We're over here. Okay. Okay. So here we are. This is the documentary on the Bullock brothers' homestead, and at this point it was a 25-year permaculture project. This was done in 2007, so it's quite a bit older now that they've been doing this stuff. But it's just it's pretty cool to see all the different ways that they come up with to look at the land and how to use it more sustainably and for people in general. And as always, if you have any questions, if anything's not making sense to you, if you want to just add your 2 cents, don't hesitate to chat. Send a message out, and I'll do my best to answer it or at least point you in the right direction. So, but anyway, here we go with the Bullock Brothers Homestead, a 25-year permaculture project.
So what have you got here?
These are old horizontal piston pumps, and these were the standard farm and rural domestic pump everywhere in North America and other parts of the world for most of the last century. And
so these are the Bullock brothers.
Very similar to some of the modern solar pumps. They've been refitted with DC motors and 24 to 30 volt motors, and they give us about 4 gallons a minute. 4 gallons.
So one reason you might want to use DC motors, which is direct current, rather than AC, which is alternating current, is that solar power is generated in DC, direct current. So if you want to change so you can use it at, just an outlet or that sort of thing, most of the time you have to convert it to AC current, and there's a little bit of a power loss in the conversion. But if you just want to run something directly like this water pump, it might be better just to convert your pump to run on DC, and you have a much more efficient pumping mechanism, especially since it doesn't have to travel so far. The main advantage of alternating current is that it can go a lot farther without power loss. That's why it eventually won out over direct current, but direct current is more powerful at the source, and as long as you don't have to send that electricity very far, then it could be even a better option for you.
And you found them just here and there at junkyards, and garage sales, that kind
Underneath
of thing.
buildings, in old sheds, junkyards.
This is Peak Moment.
See, starting to get some comments in. Let's see now. So when we're done with this, Spitfire asks if we can watch a brilliant video by Abby Martin. Oh, that's a good, you know what? I haven't changed my captions. So let me change that. And I will put up the link for the Discord. So we have a Discord now, and that's where you can drop any links that you like. I'll go ahead and put that up in chat too. All you got to do actually is just type, there's a bunch of commands now with Nightbot, so all you got to do is type an exclamation point and then just the word Discord with no spaces in between or anything. And you will find the invite link to our Discord. Nightbot will put it up right there for you. So if you have any links, you can put it in the Discord, and I will take a look. And what it's on how plasticine got how Palestine got colonized. Well, that's not really what we're talking about tonight, Spitfire. That might be a good one for a future stream, but tonight we're talking about permaculture, specifically homesteading. So I think I'm going to keep it to that topic. But you can go ahead and put that in the Discord, and then perhaps later on we'll take a look at that. Might be an interesting thing to look at for sure. And good evening to you as well, Natalie. I don't know if I said that to you yet, but hello. Good to see you here. Thanks for coming by. We'll just move ahead in the video right now, though.
We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health.
CC should be on.
But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas.
Not the highest quality video.
Peak Moment
240
is
the highest
to
I can put it in.
Climate change through local community action.
Let me know if that's too
Hi,
soft.
welcome to
That
Peak
looks like it is
Moments.
coming
I'm
through
Janaea
pretty soft, so I'm going to bump up
I'm on
the...
Orcas Island, and I'm at the Bullock
Just a little
Homestead, a
bit.
permaculture homestead that these guys consider to be the center of the universe. I'm here with Sam, Doug, and Joe Bullock. All right, guys, show them how. They're going to show us what it really is like to do permaculture in a beautiful setting. Well, okay, I want to start with, how did you get started in permaculture? How did you get creating this beautiful place?
That's a good question. Actually, long before we even heard the term permaculture, we just started kind of questioning what was really going on and what was expected of us as teenagers, expecting to be useful, functional members of society, and so many things didn't seem to make sense. And we knew we liked gardens because our grandfather had a garden. Mm-hmm. We knew we liked nature, and we got along. So one thing kind of led to another.
We didn't like controlled environments like school.
Yeah.
Aha. So when did you get digging in the soil, or when did you come here?
Well, we all had a garden together in California about, what was that, 30 years ago. 30 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
And it was in a very fertile place in California. There were a lot of fruit trees already there, and we had an easy time in the garden, and life seemed simple, and it seemed like we didn't really have to work so hard in order to have some of the things we wanted.
Yeah, and we all lived together in Hawaii doing similar pre-permaculture things that many people were doing around the planet. Mm-hmm. That's where we heard of permaculture.
Mm-hmm. Plus the town we grew up in, there was a lot of old fruit trees. It was a mission town in California, San Luis Obispo, where there was fruit trees that had been there for years that just would produce so much without any care. And you could get an apricot off a tree that hadn't been cared for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, go to the supermarket and buy an apricot that tasted terrible. So we started thinking, if these things are going to do it by themselves, maybe we can sort of assist these things to do that by themselves, which is one of the basic tenets of permaculture.
Is it you're just assisting nature in doing what she already does? What do you mean?
Using nature as a model and creating gardening with her as a model.
So I want you to give us examples of that at work, where you have it here. But before we do, what are we looking at right here in this beautiful place behind you? Why are we here?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Give us-
Well, we're here on Orcas Island because it's a spectacular microclimate. It's a very diverse piece of land, and we've got a microclimate in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains. And so we've got a great climate for growing fruit, gardens. San Juan Islands are why Washington State became famous for fruit, really. Mm-hmm. And it's still a good climate for fruit, even though economics have changed. We can grow a huge range of plants here. We're never bored, plenty to eat, and so we just, work on it.
Great.
Yeah, the San Juan Islands are famous for fruit. They're drier, and there's also a lot of limestone in the soil. And also access to water in the old days, of course, before there was roads. It made it easy to get your product to market. So we found this land, was it 27, 28 years ago?
About 27, I think.
Yeah, and it had formerly been a vegetable farm out this direction in the marsh, and there was no commercial fruit growing here. But it had lots of water, and had lots of sun, and those were and some good soil. Those are factors that we considered seriously when we were looking for land.
So we're here at the edge of a marsh. What was this, and what are you doing with it?
Well, about 13,000 years ago, this was a lake when the glaciers receded, and then it slowly filled in. And as the glaciers as the organic matter filled in, it became a marsh. And I think around the turn of the century, the marsh was drained and farmed because they realized they could just lower the water level
And have land.
and have arable land that they didn't need to irrigate.
So what they grow in the...
Vegetables, potatoes, rhubarb. They didn't have irrigation technology in those days, so the ability to move water from one place to another really didn't exist. And these are the most friable, probably fertile soils that intensive cultivation, such as vegetables and potatoes, require.
Okay.
And island soils are not typically the richest soils.
Right.
These would
right.
be the best.
So there aren't potatoes out there now. Then what happened?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, I think what happened was electricity became very cheap in eastern Washington, and transportation became better, and big commercial farms, big ag farms, or even small-scale ag farms became profitable because they could irrigate the desert.
Right.
And then the Depression too. I think it was in around the mid to late 40s that farmers here decided that they really couldn't grow crops as easily as they could.
Profitably, anyway.
Yeah, yeah, with all the...
Yeah, and also what also happened was the marsh slowly dropped just from tillage.
The soil level. This got
Right.
compost pile sinks
Okay.
in time. This
Okay.
organic material was exposed to oxygen.
And they fertilized, the
nutrients.
nitrogen broke down the organic matter, and it slowly sunk, and so each year the water was a little higher.
Yeah.
But actually the soil was lower. And they tried to drain it more, but the neighbors wouldn't let them, so they stopped farming at some point.
Okay.
And when we came here, that was an interesting question. Some people thought, oh, isn't it a shame? Wouldn't it be nice if it was farmland again? And we thought, well, we kind of like water. So actually we wanted to have more water in here. And so we did everything we could to maintain as high a water level as possible, even though it meant less arable land. We have a little strip here where we're standing of really prime soil. And right up there, it turns into some really poor, porous, dry, gritty,
Infertile.
infertile soil.
Show me.
An example?
Sure, let's
we
go
can
up and see. So here we are at this edge just above the marsh where you say there's really, really good soil.
Right.
Yeah? Let's see.
Oh, this.
You want to see some of
Yeah,
this?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Take a
I'll
look
just
at.
stick my hands down into it. Look at that.
Now that.
Now why is this
Crumbly,
good
black.
soil?
A worm's dream. Okay.
A worm's dream. Okay.
Well, this soil is prime, and it's because it was formerly underwater, probably a long time ago before the white guys came and did the drainage. But when we came here, this was not available to us immediately. It was covered with a thicket. This land had not been farmed, managed, grazed, mowed for
So you had
30, 40 years?
berry
Right.
thickets
Yeah.
and
30, 40 years.
roses and blackberries.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, and they were thick. You couldn't barely walk through. You couldn't walk through them.
That's a good question, Natalie. I'm not sure how many acres they do have. Let me look that up real quick. Let's see. On their website right now. Let's see how many they actually have. The homestead. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing any acreage. It doesn't look like it's that many though. Looks like maybe 10 acres, maybe 20 acres. They were featured pretty prominently in a book that I like a lot. It's called Gaia's Garden. I'll look up a link for that one right now. It's a really great intro to permaculture practices. It was by the late Toby Hemingway. Let me just find a link for you. Oh yeah, from Chelsea Green. So here we go. I'm going to put this right in the chat now. Let's go back here and put that in the chat. So here's Gaia's garden. Oh, why did that? All right. So yeah, if you check out that book there, the Bullock brothers are yeah, you're welcome. They're featured pretty prominently in that. I hope they get into this. I haven't actually watched this ahead of time, this video, but I really hope they get into the chinampas that they made on the marshland there, because it sounds like it was pretty productive, and they had some struggles with it initially. Apparently, I think it was muskrats would come in, and they would eat all the young reeds as they would grow. So they were running out of reeds to use to pile with the mud, the traditional way you make a chinampas or a chinampa. I don't know if it is plural or if that's just what it's called, a chinampas. I'm not quite sure of the etymology. But anyway, so the way you would normally do it is that you would take layers of reeds, just like cattails or whatever you have around, any sort of reedy type aquatic plant, and you'd layer that with mud and pile that up inside of, basically a wooden fence. And that's how you make the chinampa, which is basically a peninsula garden, or it can be an island as well, and fairly narrow usually, and then you have canals running all around it. And so they built that on this island, but they were having trouble with their supply because these muskrats would come in and eat the young shoots before they had a chance to mature, and they didn't know what they were going to do. And eventually they just kind of, I think they basically said, forget this project for now. It seems as though the muskrats have won. And they just left it alone for a little while. And, lo and behold, a family of otters came in to the area, drawn by the muskrats around them, and started hunting and eating the muskrats. And eventually things got brought back into a dynamic equilibrium where there wasn't so many muskrats that they would completely eat up all of the young reeds as they were growing, and the otters, had a good food supply. So basically, their lesson from that was just, let nature take its time, and it will find a way to kind of balance things out when you have a problem. In a lot of cases, so that was a pretty cool story. That's within that book, Gaia's Garden. So I very much encourage you, if you're interested in learning about more of the techniques, that's mostly what it goes into, is the techniques, more so than the philosophy even. That's a really great one. W. Hemingway was an amazing guy. We watched a video of his a few weeks back where he talked about his permaculture city. So it's really tragic that he passed. I think it was 2015, only at the age of, I think he was in his 50s at the time that he passed. So very tragic. He really had a bright career ahead of him once he started combining ideas of planning cities with permaculture. I was really excited to see where that was going to go, but fortunately circumstances were otherwise, and that got cut short. But yeah, let's move on in the video now.
So we took a lot of effort to clear this, a lot by hand, some with machinery, so because we knew we had something that we could work with easily here that would produce a lot for a little bit of effort.
And you also mentioned that this is an edge.
Right.
Between what and what?
An edge between the wetland
Right.
and rocky, dry
Yeah, remember
hillsides.
that
with
edge
very porous
effect?
soil.
Use and value the
And
marginal.
fir forests, fir and pine forests.
And
It's your basic wetland edge.
Yeah. And a kind of a common premise in ecology certainly, but in permaculture as well, is that the edge, where two different distinct environments meet, is the richest interface. Whether it's between forest and field, whether it's between land and sea, and estuary, and most major cities of the United States exist in such places. Port towns.
Humans basically lived in wetland edges for
Well, sure,
all
to
time.
get our water and fertile soil.
Everything else.
Right.
Yeah, and you tend to have one species or group of species that lives in the woodland and one group of species that lives in the meadow or the prairie, and then you get those crossing over in a third a distinct group of species that lives in that edge.
Just on the edge.
Yeah. So
And that's often the edges where fruit trees naturally pop up.
So that's exactly what they're describing is why we use edges and value the marginal. That's a big permaculture principle, because he's talking about how in the meeting of two different types of biomes, you'll have creatures from one biome and the other biome where they will intersect most often at that point, that edge. And then there's even a third group of creatures often that like that edge. You see this a lot with weeds, actually. You'll see weeds that specialize in colonizing the edge of a woodland. You see that with things like in the Midwest, we have a big problem with buckthorn, and also with things like garlic mustard. In the South, you'll see things like kudzu, and these are almost always problems of the edge. Like these weeds, quote unquote, have been adapted to take advantage of what is often a disturbed space. So you have a big blowdown in a storm, and suddenly you have a different edge for your woodland, a different border for it. And so these are adapted to come in and take advantage of the new light that's been opened up. You see these species that often thrive on edges more than anything. Oh, let's see, who was that who just liked? Limitless. Oh, whoa! A raid from Idan Simpson. Welcome in, raiders. Thank you so much for the raid. Everybody go ahead and follow Idan Simpson, a really great leftist creator. Thank you so much. Oh, welcome, Madame Defarge. Good to see you. Yeah, we're talking about permaculture tonight. So we're looking at permaculture homesteads, and we were just talking about using the edge and valuing the marginal and that sort of thing. So let me just give a shout out to Dan for 1 second here. Actually, I don't know if we'll see if it works from this. There you go. So everyone go check out Idan Simpson. Really great leftist streamer. Does it most days of the week in the middle of the day, and checks out a whole bunch of really cool topics and stuff. So yeah, thanks so much for the raid. And let's see, what was that other notification there? Let me just check. I'm using Restream, so I don't always have my notifications right in front of me. Oh, a subscription. Thank you so much, Limitless329, for the subscription. Thank you very much. And thank you all for the follows. Limitless326, Femboy Ancom, Geolancer3. Thank you for the follows. Very much appreciated. Thank you for the follow, Hollywood Kate. All right. So yeah. I am Zach. I do the Bread Theory stream for those of you who are unfamiliar with my work. During the week on Wednesdays, I like to do theory streams. Thank you for the follow, Radiant Robin Lee. So anyway, during the week on Wednesdays, I do a theory stream where we go through chapter by chapter, a leftist audio book, and then stop to kind of bring modern context to it. We just finished up with State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. That was the one we did, and we're going to move on to the ABC of Anarchy by an anarchist by the last name of Berkman, Alexander Berkman, coming up on this Wednesday. And then on the weekends, on Sunday nights, I like to do kind of whatever, and oftentimes permaculture is something that, I have a somewhat extensive background in. I have my permaculture design certificate, and I've been thinking about these issues for quite some time, and I think it's something that could be very beneficial to the left to kind of adopt and start using some of the principles and ethics. So I've been doing streams on that, but I also do stuff on new urbanism. Sometimes we just watch random videos. It kind of just depends on whatever mood I'm in. But yeah, anyway, thank you all for following. I really appreciate that. And let's move on in the video. So right now we're talking about the Bullock brothers. They have a homestead out on Orcas Island, and they're kind of going through some of the philosophy behind why they did things as they did, as they set up their homestead.
Really?
You don't find them under the canopy of the forest. You don't find them out in the field.
True.
They'll come up right in the rose thickets and the things that are the
Where
edge
there's enough
species.
moisture there and good soil.
Protection from browse.
And so
vigor.
you put in the fruit trees.
Well, in
Is that
permaculture,
right?
it's basic tenet to try and create edges. Because human habitation do best in species, more diversity, more niches, ecological niches in the edge.
Yeah, so for those of you who just missed it, I think I was speaking right before the raid. The idea of using the edge is on the edges of any sort of biome. So you have like a forest next to a field. You're going to have creatures that live primarily in the forest and creatures that live primarily in the field. And they're going to cross paths in that section. And also there's going to be a certain group of creatures that like that edge itself. So you have basically 2.5 or even 3 biomes, you might say, all kind of coalescing around the same area. So if you want to grow a lot of very different things all in the same space, that's a good way to go, is to maximize the amount of edge. So that's a big permaculture principle, is to value the edges, use edges and value the marginal. And this is one way that it's applied. So he has a forest coming right up to a wet marshland, and that's where he plants a lot of his stuff, is in that in-between zone. Has very rich soil and a lot of biodiversity.
So as many edges as we can create means that life is better.
But that is totally different from what we see in industrial agriculture, right? Where you got all the same thing for miles and
All
miles.
right.
No, nobody's
Well,
saying
hello.
that's a good thing.
Okay.
Excuse me. Let me just pause that again. All right. Yes, thank you so much, Madame Defarge, for reminding people to refresh so that I get that on my viewer count. I just recently made affiliate just about a month ago. This is, I think, now into my 2nd month of being an affiliate, so it definitely helps keep my numbers up very much, so it's appreciated. Thank you for your compliment, Radiant Robin Lee. You said Radiant is just fine. Lower down, I believe. All right. Left, keep moving left. I'm all for that. Absolutely so. Cool. All right. Let's continue on.
I mean, I would imagine your productivity is way beyond that kind.
If you really started to analyze every level of productivity, absolutely.
Inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
probably.
It's a difficult thing to actually monitor when you get that many species happening all the time.
And also just a benefit to the local ecology and the flora and fauna of this area. We're not wiping out, every species so we can grow iceberg lettuce.
Right.
Right?
I mean,
it's a home for.
Even though our diet is primarily iceberg lettuce, we're trying not to grow just
Thousand Island dressing, we gotta buy it, admittedly.
is that the new
Yeah.
name? Orca's Thousand Island dressing, right?
But
Well,
a lot
no.
of things we've done have actually benefited the wildlife around us. I mean, there's all the diversity in the edge, the sizes, the fruits that we plant. I mean, birds are in paradise here.
Well, there really wasn't water here when we came, and those islands certainly didn't exist.
Aha.
So that islands are an excellent place for habitat for birds and otters.
And a nice edge. More edges like you've made.
So,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of how we, at this time in this landscape, can maybe tweak it a little bit to make it slightly more productive, slightly less maintenance. Not a whole lot of huge changes at this stage we can really or intend to do.
Okay, great. Well, I noticed as we walk through here that you've got plants of all kinds of varieties. So talk to me about the diversity of what I'm seeing here.
Well, increasing a biodiversity or genetic biological resources is one of the basic premises.
Gotta keep them
of any
edges,
kind
that's
of
right,
permaculture
Lewis.
design and planning. And it's not just because it's good and healthy to eat a huge variety of things. It is, but it's also with diversity, there's resilience.
Yeah,
We
okay.
never know. Sometimes people say to us, well, why do you have these things that are kind of subtropical? What happens when we get that super cold year? Well, that's when those apples that were developed in Saskatchewan, or the gooseberries that were developed in Finland, might just come into their own. So it's not simply a question of us trying to push the limit with growing things that are maybe a little bit subtropical here. And there was some hardy citrus or things like loquats,
Hardy bananas.
pomegranate.
All right, so we're getting into another permaculture principle, another big one, and that's use and value diversity. And there's several reasons for that. One is so that, as he was talking about, you never know exactly what kind of weather you're going to have year to year. So some years you're going to have good weather for one type of bush, like you mentioned. What did you mention? Gooseberries or something like that. And so you might get a really good crop of gooseberries that year that good weather hits. And other years, you might not have such a good crop of gooseberries, but it might be a good year for something else. So you're kind of hedging your bets against the weather for one thing. And for another thing, and I'm sure they'll probably get into it soon here, it's a way to kind of make things less of a all-you-can-eat buffet for whatever predator's coming onto your field. So if you imagine like a cornfield, and it's just corn as far as the eye can see. Imagine a predator that loves corn and does really well eating corn, reproducing, and moving out across that cornfield. It's going to look to them like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and there's nothing that's going to slow them down. So that's what makes single pests so devastating for modern agriculture, because they rely on monocrops. If, on the other hand, you just had a patch of corn, well, that predator might not even ever find it. They have to go a long way through a bunch of foods that they may not eat at all in order to finally find your corn. And if it does find it and it does devastate your one little patch, well, that's not the end of your entire harvest for the year. You have other things. It's building resilience, and that's a big reason why valuing diversity is so important on any sort of permaculture homestead. And along with the pest management aspect of it, just because a certain pest really loves, say, like that cornfield again, that doesn't mean that the things that usually eat them are able to survive in just corn as well. You may have a predator of that pest that needs a different sort of habitat. It may, like a certain type of tree or bush to, go through its life processes and have its babies. And if all you have is corn, that's really bad for the things that prey on that particular pest. So they're not going to be as effective. Now, if you have a diversity of things, there's a greater chance that you're going to attract a bunch of different predators and keep things in that dynamic equilibrium a lot better, because you're providing all the different sorts of habitats. You're more closely mimicking an actual functioning ecosystem by having a huge diversity of stuff that you grow.
You got those kind of things here.
Well, we mess around with them. They're not all productive. And that could just be a cultural thing, or it could be climatic. We might need some heat. But just the idea they're here. I mean, we talk about what would happen if we run out of oil, we run out of this, what out of that. One thing that could really limit us in the future.
I see the peak oil thing this was back filmed in, I think, 2007. So the peak oil thing was really big back then. Even I myself was pretty into the concept that at some point soon, like most of the oil geologists put it at somewhere around 2020, in fact, there was going to come a peak where production would necessarily fall. We would have taken up all the easy spaces to get oil out of, and from that point forward, it would cost more and more energy to extract the energy out of the ground, right? Because you need to have wells, you need to have a whole, shipping and piping infrastructure just to take the raw fuel for the energy and turn it into actual usable energy. And it's called energy returned on energy invested. So with fossil fuels, that number's been pretty good. You get like 25 units historically of energy back for every 1 unit of energy you put into extracting it. The idea would be that if all of these different oil fields, like especially the big ones in Saudi Arabia, were to at the same time peak, or very close together, peak in their production and start falling, that it would start the collapse of Western civilization or all of, industrialized civilization for that matter, because it would just become more and more hard to extract that oil. Prices then would necessarily go up and up and up. Now, what they didn't project at that point was things like fracking and getting into some of these shale oils and that sort of thing. And those have come in and kind of supplemented any sort of decline in oil. But it's still an important problem to think about, because it's one of those things that there just is a physical limit to it. At some point, because we are burning through more fossil fuel than is being generated at any given year. It's something like we go through about 34,000 years worth of fossil fuel as it is generated from organisms every year that we do fossil fuel production. Excuse me. And that was, it's been a while since I've actually looked at that statistic, so it could be more, it could be less, but it's about that. It's many thousands of years it takes to generate the amount of oil or gas or coal that we use in a given year. So at some point we will get to a peak. And it's better always to plan ahead and be able to have a resilient civilization that's capable of withstanding that sort of an energy descent before the time that you need it. And at the very worst, if you reorganize your society to be, compatible with a more low energy future, and that future doesn't come even within your lifetime, there's really no downside. It's cleaner air, it's more resilience for the effects of climate change, which continue to rise year after year. So if you have things like solar panels and wind turbines and more of a what's known as a distributed system, you're more able to weather literally the whatever sort of storm gets thrown at you, because there's less of a chance that all of those pieces of power infrastructure are going to get knocked out all at the same time. And also things that are generated locally, like wind and solar, and even geothermal, are not subject to the sort of supply line disruptions that can happen in a natural disaster. So there's really only benefit in the long term for reorienting your society to a more low energy and locally generated energy future. So little bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant to what they're talking about right now.
Is the inability to obtain plant material from some other part of the world that might be really valuable. That one element could make a difference in maybe not survival, but in living.
So let's see. Radiant asked, this might be a ridiculous question. Do you ever think about the Earth just becoming one giant sinkhole? I don't know how that would happen. Literally we'd have to jettison a bunch of the Earth to make that happen. Do you mean like a metaphorical sinkhole? Just like there's no way out, where you're just going to have runaway disaster after disaster and there's no hope for life on Earth? If that's what you're driving at, I think it's rather unlikely we'd ever get to that point. I think climate catastrophes would be devastating, yes, but it's never going to be as bad every place on Earth. It's going to be worst for, first of all, it's worse right now for like Pacific Islands that are very low lying and already starting to go underwater, or places like Miami, where every time they have a storm surge, because of the porous rock that's underneath Miami, everything floods every single time. Places like New York, which are not that far above sea level, it's going to be worse for these places first. And those will have rippling effects further inland, all these places, and a lot of dislocated people and climate refugees and all that sort of thing. But I think we'll still survive, and I think we'll still maintain some semblance of civilization, let's say, some semblance of a technologically advanced interworking of people and materials. So you say, Radiant, we have drilled and pumped so much out of it, mining and things. Oh, now that is an interesting point. There already is repercussions from some of the fracking extraction activities. That's why, if you remember in the news, it wasn't probably more than like 5 or so years ago, they were talking about earthquakes happening in places like Ohio and other areas where they were doing a lot of fracking. This stuff already happens because they're taking out, so if that's what you mean, for sure. Yeah, in areas that we're doing fracking, we're taking out so much stuff from underneath the earth that it's creating seismic activity, where things are shifting and settling and actually creating earthquakes. So far, I don't think they've ever been as bad, or have ever been bad enough to actually bring down any towns or anything like that, or any big buildings. But it is definitely a worrying trend. And I mean, as we rely more and more on fracking, I can only see it getting worse. So, yeah, I don't know the entire world, because the entire world is not over fossil fuel deposits, thankfully. So there'll definitely be some places that make out better than others, but yeah, it's going to be continuing to be a problem in those places where those industries are popular. But yeah, thank you for the question. That's a good one.
Well, or just kind of getting along.
And certainly with impending climate change, we never know when it's really going to go, right? It's just all theories, and it might be really handy to have a whole lot of loquats around here.
Well, it might
particularly
be
pear cactus. It might be just the
because
perfect
this
thing.
may turn out to be 10 degrees warmer.
There you go.
and
There's
drier.
another reason to plant a lot of different stuff. And even like they're doing here, put it in a greenhouse.
So you're really Resilient.
So you can, maybe some of those things in the greenhouse are eventually going to be able to survive outside,
And we're
just
not
as climates shift
we're
around.
not
You never know.
exclusive. I don't like to see any
And it's really hard to say
organism,
in any
really
given place.
vilified. You know, it's like even plants that are considered invasives, in some ways, they do have their place to play in the overall picture, as mosquitoes do, for example. Simply saying eradication, and that sounds so way too much like genocide. I think there's levels of management, and there's tolerable population levels, and those are things we have to strive for. But
Yeah, so what he's talking about is keeping things as they are in nature, in a dynamic equilibrium. If you take a very simple example, you have like rabbits and lynx, and the lynx eat the rabbits, and if there's less lynx around, if there's a bad year for lynx, the rabbit population explodes, and then that explosion causes the lynx to then go out and eat a whole bunch more rabbit and be more successful and reproduce more, and then there's more lynx, and then they eat up all the rabbits, or most of the rabbits. It's never all of them, or almost never all of them. And then the lynx population goes down because they don't have enough food. And this is what's known as a dynamic equilibrium. Nothing is ever completely eradicated, but things are kind of kept in check by just physical limitations and availability of food and shelter and all these sorts of things. So that's what we're trying to do in a permaculture situation, is more mimic an ecosystem. So the idea is that, so trying to eradicate everything, for one thing, is kind of not a great idea, because it takes a whole lot of energy that you could be putting towards a lot more things. It takes a whole lot of materials. If you're using pesticides or herbicides, it ends up having repercussions down the food chain, especially with herbicide and pesticides. A lot of times those things not only kill the target pest, but they will destroy the living soil that you really, really depend on to have long-term sustainable food production. I think it was recently that I read that it's more often than not a given plant will have some sort of relationship with soil living fungus. They may exchange nutrients with one another. They may take out certain poisons. They have some sort of a symbiotic relationship with soil living fungus. So if you're putting poisons into the soil, there's a good chance you're going to end up killing that fungus at the same time. If you're tilling the soil, there's a good chance you'll break up that mycelial network. That's the underground parts of the mushroom. The mushroom, you may be aware, is only really the part that you see is the fruiting body. But underneath the soil, there's a huge thousands of mile web of these little tendrils. They're called hyphae. And they're the mycelial structure, the fungus structure that makes up the bulk of that organism. So if you're running through with a tiller, or if you're putting different poisons on the soil, you're really going to disrupt and break up that relationship. And you're going to end up having soil eventually that basically just serves to be a medium to grow stuff in. It doesn't really give any nutrients to the plant. There's no more a symbiotic relationship between the plants and the rest of the soil community. And at that point, you're reliant on adding all the inputs, all the fertilizer, all of the pest suppression. You're doing all of these functions that nature already provides for free just by its interaction with the different species in an ecosystem. So you're paying for something you don't have to pay for. So the idea is to do less work overall to save yourself time, money, and energy and frustration, and just set things up in a way beforehand so that they will keep each other in check. So no one thing gets out of control. You never lose an entire crop of anything, or, if you're growing animals, you never lose all of your animals. Things are kept in check just by setting things up right in the first place. That's a big tenet of permaculture, is to work with nature instead of against it. That was a big takeaway from the most important text, I would say, in permaculture by one of the founders, Bill Mollison. It's called Permaculture, A Designer's Manual. I'll go ahead and link that in the chat as well. Let me just pull that up real quick. There we go. Let's see. I want to find the PDF of it, because there is a free version. Unfortunately, this book is out of print, so the only way to find it, if you're looking on like Amazon and stuff, is, people selling their personal copies, and it tends to be over $100, $150, $200 I've seen as well. So it's not really accessible to your average, person. It's not accessible to me. I couldn't just drop that on a single book, but it is available for free online. So I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat right now, and you can go check that out on your own. Oh, wait, cancel. So here's, I'll put the name first. Oops. Having trouble there. 1 second. So there's that, and then here comes the link. I don't know why Restream does this sometimes. It makes it hard. Anyway, there's a free PDF that you can look at your own leisure. If you want to know anything about permaculture, that's the place to start. Start with the Permaculture Designer's Manual. You will learn probably 80 to 90% of what you need to know about permaculture, and you'll have a good idea of how you can apply these principles to any design that you do. It doesn't just have to be a homestead or some large-scale project. I live in a city. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, in an apartment, and I still practice permaculture principles inside. I grow a certain amount of edible stuff. Never really enough to feed myself. I don't have that much space. But I try to make use of all those edges. So I have a vine that grows basically all the way up my window, and it's now climbing across parts of my ceiling. And that's a passion fruit vine in my living room. I have other plants that are just ornamental, but, they just kind of add to that sense of biophilia, that idea that people have an inherent connection to natural living things. And then I have other stuff that actually does give me food. Like I had a pepper plant that finally has lost its battle to frost in my window box, but it gave me a couple peppers over the season. And for me, that's more important, that you do something rather than just sit back and kind of, throw your hands up and say, oh, there's nothing I can do. I have such a small amount of power in my life, whatever. Everyone can grow one thing. It doesn't even have to be an edible thing. As long as you grow one thing, that can really help with that connection. And you really do connect to nature on a more visceral, physical level when you are taking care of something. It's not just an abstract concept to be protected out there somewhere. It becomes very real to you. And you will even see the dynamics of ecosystems taking place. Right now we have a problem with mealybugs in a lot of our plants. My banana tree has been really ravaged by it. But if I was able to hook that up with a larger ecosystem, like if I had a big greenhouse, I could really be practicing more of these permaculture concepts. I could be inviting in insects that eat that, but because I'm just in an apartment, I don't have that. But at least I can grow something, at least I can have some sort of connection to the food I eat, even if it's a very small amount. And I think that makes a big difference, because it's you can throw all the facts and logic you want at people. You can come up with the best arguments you can think of that logically, of course, you have to care about the environment, but that alone is not enough to force people to care or to want to do anything about it. They could come with all of the factual information, all the facts on climate change, on the benefits of being connected to nature. You could give them E.O. Wilson's work on biophilia. You could throw all this knowledge and information at them, and it's not going to make them care. What makes them care is an emotional connection. And just growing stuff and taking care of stuff, that's one thing that can do it. Another one is just appreciating the beauty of the world. That kind of bridges that gap, that is-ought gap in philosophy. The idea that, philosophy, science, they can tell you how the world is. They can tell you how it might be if you manipulate this or that factor, but they can't tell you how it should be. You can never use philosophy to say this is how the world should be. You can never use science to say this is how the world should be, because there's always someone who could say, I don't care. I understand it could be a bad thing that happens in your worldview, but I don't think it's bad to me if this particular outcome happens. So things like beauty and physical connection to nature, I think helps bridge that gap. So for me, that's why it's really important. So Radiant, you've been enjoying succulents. Yeah, I have a bunch of succulents now. My wife and I went on a bit of a buying spree for a while with succulents. There's so many cool shapes and colors that it comes in. Marcus Jason's, yes, you can ask me a question. Go ahead. Oh, you watch the crows, Radiant. That's really cool. I love watching crows, Just try that sometime. If you have a window that you can go sit at and see, even if it's just like a small stand of trees or a local park or anything, try getting out into nature and just being quiet for like 20 minutes, half an hour. Maybe even take a journal with you. I did that for a class one time. We did a nature journal. Write down what you see, what you hear, all this stuff. You'll start to notice a whole lot more. And if you're sitting there quiet for, just even like 10 minutes, all the stuff that was on high alert, hearing you, tromping through the forest, trying to get out of your way because, you represent danger to them, they let their guard down. They start coming out. They'll start interacting with one another. You'll notice a whole lot of patterns that you never saw before. Then maybe when the sun comes out, the dragonflies come out and they start eating mosquitoes in the field. And then perhaps the swallows come in and start eating other bugs. Maybe certain birds congregate in one tree, and then at a different time they congregate in a different tree. You just start noticing these things just by sitting. And that's another permaculture principle, is to observe and interact. That's the first one of David Holmgren's principles. He was the other co-founder of permaculture. He's like, just observe and interact. Make little changes in your world, but at the same time really keep your eyes open to the different patterns, because that's the most important thing. That's your number one planning step, no matter what it is you're planning. Observe the conditions as they are. So Mark Jasons, your question is there a word for someone who is different than people think? Yeah, sure. There's plenty of words for that. I'm sure you could figure that out. Radiant says we take walks and pick up garbage. That's awesome. That's an awesome thing to do. And it's a little thing, but no matter what happens, even if you're not picking up all the garbage, even if you're not stopping people from throwing away the garbage in the first place, you're making that spot more beautiful for people that come by after you. And that could be a big thing. That could be the difference between someone caring about a space and saying, oh, this is dump anyway. I don't really care. Develop it, log it, who cares? So that's really important. I appreciate that you do that sort of thing. Thank you. I think I missed a few more comments. I'm going to scroll back just a second here. Oh, no, I think I'm caught up. Nature is so important. I totally agree, Radiant. And Seize the Mini says, found some more pawpaws in my backyard. Oh, I'm so envious. Depending on what map you use, here's another good tool. If you're going to start a garden or growing anything outside, a good tool to use is called the USDA Hardiness Zone Map. Just type it in. It'll come up. USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Hardiness Zone Map. And it will tell you what zone you're in. And what that means is this is the minimum temperature it's going to get to, the lowest temperature it'll get to in the winter. So next time then you go to like a garden center or something, if you look in the perennial section, those are plants that come back year after year. They don't have to come back from seed. You will see on them what zone they are hardy to. Now, I am, according to the USDA, I'm still in zone 4. But according to some growers, the Twin Cities has moved into zone 5 due to climate change. So that you can see this band forming of zone 5, which is a slightly warmer zone, coming up the Mississippi River and then dipping into the Twin Cities metro. Partially because of the urban heat island effect. And that's the idea that with a lot of black pavements and stuff like that, you have the sun shining on it and it absorbs all that solar energy and then radiates it over the course of the nighttime. It keeps things a little bit warmer. So that's partially at play, I'm sure. But also it's because of climate change. You can see those, that's another cool thing to look at, because even the USDA has edited the USDA hardiness zone map over the course of the last 20 years. They've moved the zones up a little bit. And in some places it actually has gotten a little bit colder overall. But the overall map has shifted. All the zones have shifted north, so you can see the effects of climate change playing out in real time. It's both terrifying but reassuring that this is a real thing that's happening, and you're not wrong to believe the climate scientists, because there's data to back it up. But anyway, so that was not your entire question there. Seize the mini. Sorry about that. You're just talking about how you found the pawpaws. Oh, that was what I was going for. So pawpaws are a zone 5 plant. That's like the minimum temperature they can get to. So they're only marginally hardy where I'm at, but and I've still never even sampled their fruit. But the pawpaw tree, for those of you who are unaware, is the largest fruiting tree in North America, or at least in the temperate part of North America. There may be larger ones in the tropics, but at least in the temperate part of North America, that's the largest fruiting tree. And they produce these big, kind of mango-shaped fruits. They come in clusters of 4 usually, and they have seeds inside, so you got to scoop out the seeds. But apparently they taste a little bit like banana custard. So I really want to try one. So I'm totally envious, Seize the Minis, that you're able to enjoy that right in your backyard, because that's awesome. You can't even get that in the grocery stores here in Minnesota, which I'm always sad about, but c'est la vie. All right. So Radiant, you said earlier that your dog and you have been having lunch with them 3 years now with the crows. That's awesome. One that always says hi. That's really cool. And I'm sure you'll agree, it's like a shock to the system when you really make a connection with something that lives out there. You're no longer just an observer. You're actually interacting with nature. Talking back to you. That's really cool. Does it literally say hi? Because some crows actually can mimic human language. That would be interesting to know as well. Yeah, close your eyes listening. Just see what you find. It's really cool. All right. Scrolling down a bit. So Natalie had said the little things make a big difference when each person contributes what they can do. Yeah, a lot of small changes can add up. That's definitely true. Although we should never make the mistake of thinking that that's the most important way to make change, because most of the things that shape our life are systemic. It is capitalism. It is just business practices in general. It is local politics. It is regional and national and international politics and political systems. These are the things that more often than not shape our lives in the biggest ways. So really, those are the systems that have to be changed in order to make the bulk of the changes needed. There's something like only 10 companies in the world that produce over half of the world's pollution through their industries. It's systemic change that's really necessary. But individual change is good, and it can really help you feel better about your impact in the world. And if your little bit of change is convincing other people to adopt a worldview that together, perhaps with enough of you believing it, can really change these systems, that definitely is an individual change that you can make in your life and help others make in their life as well, that really can add up to systemic changes. Yeah, so Seize the Mini says that pawpaws are kind of a banana mango crossover. That sounds amazing. I really want to try one sometime. Banana custard is a good description. All right. Natalie, I think you're in Illinois, are you not? I'm pretty sure Illinois can grow pawpaws. Let's take a quick look-see at the USDA hardiness zone map. Let's look at the most current one here. I'm not going to put it up on screen because it's too much of a hassle doing it the way that I'm doing. So here's the Arbor Day one. Let's visit that. That's usually a good source. I'll link that for you too in the chat. You can check out your own USDA hardiness zone right there. Go check that out. You can see where you fall into if you're in the United States. I don't know how they do it in other parts of the world. I assume they've adopted something similar anyway. But let's take a look. So it looks like, what do we got? It looks like Illinois, you might be, even if you're in the northwest of Illinois, it looks like you're still in zone 5, but most of the state is zone 6 through zone 7 even in parts of the you know, the southernmost tip there. So I think definitely you can grow pawpaws. I know they're real big in Kentucky and Ohio and other, you know, Indiana even as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if they even grow up into Michigan, it looks like, too. So I think definitely you can grow pawpaws. You should just, I would recommend taking a look, see if anyone's growing it locally. That'd be really cool to find out, huh? So Radiant says that when they were growing up in Washington State, it rained all the time, and now it's dry and burning up. Yeah, I mean, the same is true of Minnesota. I recall just even being in junior high, and now I'm almost 40. But when I was in junior high, I remember walking to school on many days where it would be in the negative 20s, and we would still have not recess. We would still have gym class. Yeah, I think negative 20 or 25 was the cutoff, and this is Fahrenheit for all of you international listeners, our viewers. But it would be negative 20 or 25, and then they would say we're not going to go outside for gym class. But up to that point, it was totally fine. And I remember many days walking to school, it'd be, you know, there'd be a good week or two cold snap every single year. And now recently, if you look at the data, I think over the past 10 years, there's only been a handful of years that it's even reached that negative 20 to 25 mark at all, like through the entire winter. I think a couple years ago it did. I'm not even sure if it did at all last year, but it's, you know, overall the winters are getting milder and we're getting a lot more concentrated weather. I've noticed that a lot too. When I was younger, there used to be a lot of times in the summertime where you'd have long periods of overcast, you know, maybe even a week or two, where it would just kind of drizzle on and off. You'd be just, you know, a few inches of rain here and there, but it was kind of mild, very humid. And now that almost never happens. It's almost all these very, you know, almost violent downbursts that are the norm. And this year was a very dry year all across Minnesota. Things are very much changing, and that's another part of climate change. It's not just about heat; it's about weather patterns as well. It's about if you're going to go through drought and be threatened by, you know, famine, and also, or at least local famine, and wildfires, or if you're going to go through flooding and also have crops damaged through that as well. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Things are changing. So Seize the Mini says, check along the creek and riverbeds for pawpaws. That's usually where they're likely to grow best. Ooh, that sounds like could be an adventure in your future there, Natalie. That's really cool. Yeah, playing in mud puddles was the best. I agree. So this June in the Puget Sound, you say, Radiant, our roadways bucked, and it was triple digits. Yeah, it was super hot in Washington this year, wasn't it? That's amazing. I did AmeriCorps back in, it's been 20 years now, about exactly 20 years ago. I was just going into the AmeriCorps, National Civilian Community Corps, and our first project was in Washington State on the Puget Sound, doing habitat restoration along the Puget Sound for a YMCA camp, and it was never warm, not at all. I think we saw one day of sun, one like really brilliant day of sun in the month and a half that we were there, and that was it. And I've had friends from that area as well who've said the same thing, that yeah, they used to laugh at people that even got air conditioning who lived on the Pacific coast of Washington, because you would never need it in the summertime. It was never all that bad. But now it sounds like that's changing a lot, or at least in the past year it has. So yeah, the rain's really cool. And someday, you know, my wife and I's long-term plan someday is to move to Canada, probably to the Vancouver area, you know, specifically for that mild, you know, never really too hot, never really too cold range of temperatures, and of course the you know, the cosmopolitan life of Vancouver, and then the vast wilderness that kind of surrounds it. So yeah, we'd like to do that someday. But yeah, right now we're in Minnesota. Anyway, I think we should continue on in this video.
The absolute elimination of any group of individuals seems absolutely blasphemy to me.
So what do you do with those exotics, with those invasive species? I mean, what kind do you have here, and what do you do about them?
We have reed canary grass here, which is all along this wetland edge, and it really chokes out a lot of native species. As a big running, vigorous grass will get 7 feet tall around here, grow a good foot a week.
Jeez.
And we try and shade that out. You know,
Chop it,
shade it out, mulch it out, and then we can get other plants established in the shady conditions.
So there you go. There's a permaculture technique of filling every niche. The reason that these sorts of grasses can get established is because they're well adapted to certain conditions. In this case, that it sounds like it needs a lot of sun, this reed canary grass. If you can put stuff in place that's going to shade it out, provide enough shade that it can't get enough sunlight, that's a natural way to keep things out that you don't want, that thrive on that sunny condition. So if you then take a plant that you like using, say a fruit tree or a nut tree or you know, even like a maple tree that you can tap for syrup or something, and put that into the niche and fill that niche, it's working for you 24/7. You don't have to put up umbrellas or canopies. You don't have to go in and mechanically take it out or spray it or burn it or any of this stuff. You've now recruited an organism to work for you. And together, you both benefit because you're going to probably get some sort of yield from them. And they're going to have a place to live that you've provided for them. So it's that win-win. And again, mimicking a natural ecosystem and its dynamic equilibrium. Let's continue on.
But it's a tough one.
It's what the people who do riparian rehabilitation say it's one of the toughest ones they have to deal with. But it's got a good side. You talk to farmers, and it was introduced because it's really high in protein, and they could mow a field and have a very high protein fodder late in the summer when all the other pasture was dried up.
So it has its place.
Yeah, and it's great. We buy hay of this stuff from farmers, and we use it as mulch. You know, so it's like, well, we don't want it here, but if you get a field of it, that's okay.
I really hear you're working with.
So Radiant, you say that you have neighborhoods that have planted and made rain gardens that help collect all of the icky stuff before it goes into our drains. That's really cool. Rain gardens are an awesome technique, and it's one of the ways that you can incorporate another permaculture principle, and that's to catch and store energy. If any of you saw the opening video that I played as I was just waiting for people to come into the stream, it was from this guy who made an album based on each of the permaculture principles. Each song is a different principle. And the song that I played this time was oh no, that wasn't Catch and Store, but it's been a different stream that I did Catch and Store Energy. My mistake. But anyway, Catch and Store Energy, a permaculture principle. And one way you can do that is to gather water and keep it from just running straight off the land down into the sewers and causing flooding downstream and whatnot, and sink it into the earth. So it slowly percolates out and slowly is available to the local plant life. And a rain garden is a good way to do that. All a rain garden is a depression in the ground. It could be a long ditch. It could be just a bowl. And it usually you orient, if you have some sort of a drainage system on your property, like from the rooftop or something, orient all the downspouts towards it so it gets all collected. And then it's supposed to be over 24 hours. That's a critical time frame. Over 24 hours, all of that rainwater seeps down into the ground and then it becomes part of the groundwater. And the reason that you want to do it in 24 hours and have that kind of infiltration is because you can actually reduce mosquito populations by doing it that way. So the mosquitoes see this bit of standing water, which is their favorite thing to breed in. They go and they lay their eggs, not knowing that within 24 hours it's going to be dry again. And within that 24-hour time period, the eggs have not hatched yet, but they still need to be in an aqueous solution in order to keep on growing and living. So they dry out and they die. So it's a way to reduce mosquitoes while at the same time recharging your groundwater and having it more of an evening out of the availability of water. So if you have too much water, this can be a place where it can get collected and reduce flooding and just more evenly put it out. If you have too little water, it can work where it will collect whatever water you have, and then the ground hangs on to it longer than it otherwise would. In places like the desert, you tend to have hard packed soil that water runs off very quickly, and it's not really available to the plants once it's run off. Once it's out of the system, that's it. It doesn't just come back. So it's very precious. If instead you can hold on to that with something like a rain garden and sink it into the soil, now it's very slowly moving across the ground or across the landscape. And it gives those plants longer access to that water. So rain gardens are great. Whether you have too much or too little, it evens things out. So yeah, that's really cool that you have that in your area. Let's see what else. Yeah. Really need to take care of the earth. I totally agree with that. Rain barrels, another way to catch and store energy. And you can have that available to your plants and stuff, when it's not raining. That's again, a way to even out the amount of water that's available to the things that need it. So that's really cool. Do you happen to be anywhere near Seattle, Radiant? Because if you are, you should definitely check out, it's called the Beacon Hill Food Forest. I'll go ahead and link that as well. Let me look that up. There we go. So check this out if you're ever in Seattle. And if any of you are ever in Seattle, definitely check this out. This is a project by local permaculture practitioners in Seattle to go ahead and instead of having just a regular park that has, your standard trees and whatnot, almost every single plant that they put into this park is something that produces food in some way or another. And it's just available to the local community. It's basically like, an open air food shelf, except for it's more like mutual aid than it is charity. It's anyone can go and collect the food there whenever it's ripe. You just go and you get it. And at the same time, it provides beauty. It provides a nice, diverse and interesting to look at park to look at. So go check out the Beacon Hill Food Forest. It's really cool. I haven't seen it in person, but I've heard enough descriptions of it and I've seen enough videos about it to get a pretty good idea about it. Okay, so you're 20 minutes outside. Well, I definitely recommend you go and check that out sometime. It's really cool. Oh, so you got your COVID under control and it's safe to go back outside. Too many crazies right now. Or are you saying it's not safe? Oh, once you get your COVID under control. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm not going to speak for you. I don't know your particular circumstances, but at least here in Minnesota, I don't feel too worried about being outside, at least. I still take precautions when I go into grocery stores and stuff, even though I'm vaccinated myself. Yeah. But I understand, but that's, the food forest is going to be there. Hopefully they won't tear it out before you're able to see it, but highly recommend that. So, all right, let's move on a little bit more.
You're working with levels in elevation, right? Mm-hmm. Shade and so on. And you're working with levels horizontally, the edges.
Right.
The edges. And I also hear you're working with a particular, sun and shade and soil qualities from
soil
each
types.
spot.
Mm-hmm. We've got maybe 8 distinct soil types here on this land. So
Really?
all different rootstocks and different species. Like down here, it may be wetland plants, but up there, it's Italian stone pine and prickly pear cactus and things like that.
Sorry to pause it again, but that comment kind of struck me there, Radiant. So you had a lady spit in your face because you were wearing a mask, and she was screaming and carrying on. Yeah, I would be holy shit, man. Or, I mean man in the general sense. I don't know your gender. But wow, that would make me really scared to go out as well. That's horrible. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Oh, she tried to spit in your face. But even still, whether or not they missed you, that's pretty traumatic. Absolutely ridiculous. The absolute entitlement people have to police what other people are doing when they're just trying to keep themselves safe from people like them. It would be like if you, I don't know, we're walking around with a katana, just swinging it around, and then you got mad at everyone every time they got out of your way and oh, what the hell are you doing, guy? You're swinging a katana. You're being a danger to everyone else. This is why people are reacting to you this way. You have no reason to get mad about it. Same sort of thing with COVID. If you're going around potentially breathing a deadly virus onto everybody, and people are giving you funny looks for it, maybe you're the problem. Just saying. Wow, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's terrible. Wow. I have not had anything that bad happen. I had one lady tell me in a line, I was wearing a mask because I was in a gas station. It's pretty close quarters. And she was like, you don't have to wear that anymore. And, luckily I'm a pretty large guy, as you can tell. I was not really intimidated by a small woman telling me to not wear a mask anymore. So I just kind of shrugged it off. I was like, oh yeah, thanks for the info and stuff. But that's the worst thing that's happened to me so far. So I can't even imagine having to go through that level of aggression. That's horrible. Yeah, Natalie, there are some very disturbing people out there, radicalized for the wrong reasons, sadly. Absolutely. That's the most tragic part of it, is they've been led to believe that somehow it's the big bad government that's coming after them and all their rights and all this stuff, and they it's all their freedoms and stuff that's under assault, when really it's just, we want everyone to get over this virus so people stop dying. It's no more it's just as simple as that. Whew. Yeah, you masked to check the mail. Wow. I don't blame you at that point. I wouldn't want anyone coming by and trying to attack me. That's awful.
It's nuts.
And
Things you'd find in the northern Mediterranean.
And around our own little zones of influence, sometimes we refer to that like around the house, zone 1, or the home front, you might refer to it as. Of course, we're going to create the gardens that are most appealing to us. Because even if I live up on the top of the hill, it's a dry location, I don't want to step out of my door into a very dry reality. So I'm going to have vegetable gardens, and I'll irrigate there. But the bulk of the plantings in that area are going to be ones that require very minimal care. And down here, basically, the care involves cutting things back.
Okay, so he was just mentioning another cool concept that a lot of permaculturists practice when they're doing homesteading especially, and that's using the zone analysis. We've talked about this in earlier streams, so if you're new to the channel here, I encourage you to check out my stuff. I archive all of my streams on YouTube, and there's a playlist for all the permaculture streams I've done so far, and videos that I've created. I'm not quite caught up, but I'll get there. But there was one that we did, and we talked about zone analysis, and that's where you take your homestead, your house, wherever you're going to sleep at night, spend most of your time. That's zone 0 usually. Everything immediately around your homestead is zone 1, and that's where you're going to spend most of your interaction time. So you plan to have things that need more care, your vegetable gardens, your herb gardens, stuff that you need to cultivate more. And coincidentally, almost all of the vegetables that we tend to like, things like broccoli, beans and tomatoes, stuff like that, those tend to be annuals. So you have to replant them year after year, and they tend to like a lot of sun, and consequently you have to keep competition away from them. You can't have things coming in to shade them out, or else they just don't grow. So that's good stuff to put right in your zone 1, is all the stuff that needs the most care. And this is in the effort to save yourself a lot of work. You don't want to put your vegetable garden, 200 yards away from your house, because then you're just going to be traveling back and forth. You get all the way there. Oh, shoot, I forgot my spade. I got to go all the way back. You come all the way back to the garden. You find that it needs, some more compost in an area. Some of it's blown off or something. So you got to go all the way back to your compost pile. It's a waste of time to put things so far away when you need to interact with them the most. So now what he's talking about is in the zone they're in right now is further out. So it might be a zone 2 or even a 3. And basically all they have to do to manage that zone is to cut down the weeds once in a while. There's a technique, which we'll get to eventually. It's called chop and drop, where you take weeds and instead of them being seen as just a problem, a nuisance, you see them as them bring free compost and free ground cover to you. So you pull them up, you crack their roots, and you throw them back on the ground. And that fills in that niche better than just bare soil does. We talked about how nature abhors a vacuum. If there's bare soil or something, it's going to fill it with something. So what you want to do is make sure it's filled with something that you like, or at least can tolerate, rather than something you don't like. So just by doing this chop and drop technique, you're both killing the weed or the undesirable plant for whatever reason, and you're helping keep that niche free of new weeds or undesirables to come back in. So that's called chop and drop. So you can, that's all the management they do in this particular zone, because it's far enough out that they've planned not to have to interact with that zone all that much. And when we're talking about homesteading, usually it's going to be a very small operation. There's going to be basically just one farmhouse, and that's going to be the center of community activity. Basically, everyone that works there is going to live in that one space. So you're planning to go to and from that gathering spot. Now, if you have other people that live on your property and they have their own plots, it just becomes, different nodes of activity. But still, you can use that zone analysis around each place that people are going to return to, night after night. Oh, you live in the shade, Radiant? Yeah, I mean, there's always stuff that can grow in the shade. And again, it's just a matter of finding the right plant for that niche. So there's plenty of stuff that thrives in the shade that can be useful to you, or useful to wildlife that you want to attract as well. That's another thing you can do it for. So yeah. Yeah, exactly. You had said earlier, Radiant, that you want freedom from unsafe people. That's what I want too. I think that's the greatest threat to bodily autonomy, if we're going to use that as our standard for what should be able to be done to us. The most bodily autonomy you can offer people is to not be threatened by a deadly disease. It's a much more egregious act to put a deadly disease in someone else's body than it is to have someone put a needle in your arm and give you a life-saving vaccine with an incredibly low infinitesimal risk for any sort of adverse reaction. So yeah, I think grounding that sort of an idea in bodily autonomy is the way to go. And we have to look at the bodily autonomy of everyone that doesn't want to get sick first and foremost. All the people that have died because in some cases their bodily autonomy was not respected and people were not careful around them. So yeah, totally agree. So Natalie says, I remember many trips back to the garage and finally bought a small gardening cart to help my ADHD mind. Yeah, oh man, I've never been diagnosed, but I wouldn't be surprised if I also have ADD. I tend to get really distracted really easily. My mind just switches even without me really wanting to. That's why you'll see on this channel, I tend to go off on tangents quite a lot. So I can definitely relate to that idea of having to have all of your tools with you, and just if you put it all in one cart, you can bring it wherever you need to go. Yeah, you still forget stuff sometimes too. And my day job is as a landscaper, and that's generally how I run things there too. I will just load my truck up with every single tool I can possibly think of that I might need that day, and that way I don't have to come back, So totally get that. Let's move on.
Because things are so vigorous. Mowing and pruning out things that are excessive is not like we're constantly manipulating. It's just little tweaks here and there.
It's a very different model than highly intensive, except the fact you have so much. How much land do you have here that you think of as productive?
Well, all land is productive.
There you go. And how much? How much
Well,
land
we have
in
10
your
acres.
homestead?
So
we own
there you go.
land and we're
There's
leasing
the answer to
another
that question.
and
10
we
acre
sort of
farm.
planted beyond that.
But our central zone is quite dry, and it mostly produces some trees, and it's a nice habitat, but it was not like we're getting much food out of it. A little bit,
More
and
and more all the time.
Some of those things grow
it's
slow.
slower development on the dry, rocky
But
side.
the kind of things that our kids, the world that our kids are going to know.
It's gonna
Doug's
be more
got two
like that.
kids, little kids. I got 2 little kids, and all under 10. And what they're going to see when they get older, and there'll be nut trees that are producing so many nuts that'll be their protein source right there.
And so they're getting
So
into
you
another
really
permaculture
are
principle.
thinking,
There's another common permaculture principle of using small and slow solutions. So he's thinking about several generations of this farm developing to the point where abundance just keeps creeping further and further into these lesser and less, or into these currently lesser used areas. So he talks about this dry area where hopefully his goal is by the time his children take over. And now this is, 15 years past when they even made that video. So that time may be fast approaching when his children are old enough to take over. In fact, they probably are old enough at this point to at least be a good, integral part of the workings of the farm. But anyway, the idea is to provide for even more abundance the further you go along in time. So you start out with your highest level effort stuff. If you're doing things like digging rain gardens or swales, which is just a ditch, and berms, which is a mound, that's another technique. You can do that along it's called on contour. So if you look at a topographical map, you see all those, concentric, more or less circles or ovals or whatever, representing changes in elevation. If you were to put a ditch and then next to it a berm all along those contour lines, that's a common technique of permaculture. So if you were planning on doing that sort of system, you would get that out of the way first, so that you're not coming back after 20 years and saying, oh, you know what, I would have really liked to have done a ditch and berm system, but instead I planted my entire orchard on this hill, and now it's all mature, and now to go back and redo it, you would have to rip everything out and start from scratch again. So instead of doing that by doing the small and slow solutions, you think ahead of time. What are the biggest changes we need to make first? Let's make those changes first. That could mean building a homestead too. You want to situate your homestead before you have things going, and then plan everything from that, not the other way around. And then over time, as your system becomes more and more like a working ecosystem, as it really becomes a working ecosystem that you are just one part of and one of the sculptors of, along with billions of other organisms, it becomes less and less work because you've done all the big things first. You're starting to get trees and systems that are maturing, starting to be more self-managed. There's enough wildlife that's come in to help you manage these systems, help keep pests in check, that sort of thing. That you're sitting back and letting things kind of happen as they do, the further and further you go along. So that's called using small and slow solutions. So that's exactly what he's talking about here.
The long term.
Absolutely.
That must be a permaculture.
Well, it's a whole seventh generation concept. We want to think about house collecting, and people come over and say, oh, it looks so great, and we say, oh yeah, 30 or 40 years more, and they think we're joking. But really, a lot of our trees, we're thinking in terms of 400-year rotations and stuff like that. And big walnuts and oaks and chestnuts, they live a long time.
Yes.
And when we came here,
and that's a critical difference between the idea of homesteading, of being attaching yourself to the land for the foreseeable future, for hopefully generation after generation, keeping that sustained, and just agriculture, just extracting as much as you can from the land, maybe even, depending on how capitalist of a mindset you have, just until it's completely used up, and then you just move along to the next patch of land. But it's an idea of blending yourself with the local ecosystem as a homesteader versus extracting whatever you can, and at the same time having to put more inputs in terms of fertilizer and tilling and mechanical maintenance, all this sort of thing. So that's really the give and take, the difference in ideology. It's being a part of the land or taking from the land, viewing it solely as a utilitarian thing to be profited from.
we didn't have kids. Sam had a daughter and a stepson at the time, but we thought, God, this would be a great place. I was thinking, if I was a boy, what a great place this would be, on the edge of a marsh with salt water, sailing, and forests all around. So now we got kids, and they're totally appreciating all that. I mean, they know where every fruit tree is and every berry bush, and they eat all that stuff.
They know how to navigate this marsh and climb over those reeds, and they're off wild. And
they're unbiased. A lot of times you'll give some unusual fruit to an adult, and they go, "Oh, that's nice. Would you like another?" No. You give the kids, it's like, "Yeah, these are good," and they just keep eating them. So they're not coming at it from a necessarily cultural perspective. They're just coming at it from the concept of, does it taste good? Yes, it does. Well, eat some more then.
What a great place to grow up.
Yeah, so far so good. Tentacles of The everyday modern American reality are kind of slow to
Yeah.
strangle us here.
So, appropriate technology, right? We got solar panels for what?
These solar panels are for direct pumping system, for water pumping for agriculture. There's no batteries in the system. This water here is a fresh water that exits the marsh that we looked at earlier. It goes down a creek through a couple of ponds, winds up here. From here, it's only a couple hundred yards until it hits the salt water in the sound. So it loses its effectiveness as fresh water on the planet.
Right.
So we pump it back up and move it through our landscape again, irrigating, and everything that soaks into the soil runs into the same drainage and comes back to the pond.
So we're not taking it from one aquifer up over a ridge and down into another drainage.
Just slowing
You're
it.
just keeping it
Slowing it
within
down.
your
Right, they're
own-
catching
within
and
the
storing
flow
energy.
of the ecosystem.
Kind
We're
of like
slowing it
Recycling
across
it
the
through
land.
the
We
system.
know eventually it's going to the salt water, to the sound. We're just slowing that process down by looping it back and keeping energy in the system.
It's like old style irrigation technology, and in Egypt or somewhere, water was just taken from a high source and run, but basically into the same river basin. But we're just using a little modern but appropriate technology to do the same.
So, Joe, you teach courses here at your homestead.
That's right. We're right in the final week of a 3-week course right now, and there's about 35 students who have come. Some from
All right, Radiant. It's been nice to have you. I really appreciate your input and your questions and stuff. So, yeah, I definitely hope to see you again. And if that's you signing off, then have a great night. We're gonna have, as I mentioned earlier, we're gonna have the first chapter of the ABC of Anarchy by Alexander Berkman on Wednesday night at approximately 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. So. Thank you so much. That's a very nice compliment. I really appreciate that. I try. All right. So yeah, thank you for coming. Natalie says, just don't do that kind of thing with wild mushrooms. It could result in a bad outcome. Which kind of thing? I guess I've lost what you're referring to there, Natalie. Just are you talking about just sampling everything? Yeah, definitely don't do that with anything you're not familiar with. And that goes for berries too. There's a lot of berries that look nice, bright, and shiny, which you could probably end up having a bad day with. If not, outright kill you, depending on the berry. So be very careful in identifying things before you eat them wherever you are. Yeah, all right. All right, yeah, and you know what? I'm just going to put this up one last time. So you can follow all my links, all my social medias, right there. The Nightbot's putting it up. That's my link tree there. Just go to lanktr.ee/bread_theory, and you can take a look at all the places that I have my stuff. I don't know if I have my Instagram up there. I'll have to look at that, but I am on Instagram as well. And I also need to put a link up to my. I have one to the Facebook group that I run, Left Signal Boost, but I need to put one up to our specific event. For those of you who came in through the raid, we are doing our second annual Lefties Award Show the day after U.S. Thanksgiving, right here on this channel, bread_theory, wherever it is you're finding it. I suppose you might not even be on Twitch, so it might be called just Bread Theory. But right now, nominations are open right now, and they're open to anyone who's a member of the group. So all you have to do is sign up. It's real fast, like I have an auto ad feature on at Left Signal Boost there on Facebook. So you can go there and make sure that all of your favorite leftist creators across, the multitude of platforms and mediums that you can think of, make sure they're nominated for an award this year. And everyone that is nominated, regardless of how the voting goes, will get a little clip on of their work on award night. So it's just our little way of getting more eyeballs on creators, no matter how big or small or new they are. In fact, we have a category for new and emerging creators in basically every single category. So whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, whatever it is. So yeah, I really encourage you all to go join that. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat right now. Let's see, let me just share it. Got to scroll down a little bit more. All right, we're going to copy the link and put it right there in the chat so you can all vote for the people that you want to see get a little bit of recognition you know, we don't take ourselves super seriously. It'll be a fun night. But it's really about the creators and their work and just, you know, saying, hey, you guys should check this out more than anything. So I definitely encourage you all to do that as well. All right, let's continue on in the video though. Almost done here.
From the Northwest, some from Canada, even some people from other countries. Not they didn't come here directly from other countries, but they're originally. So it makes kind of a cultural mix. It's very interesting. And yeah, a 3-week design course where they end up with a certificate and they can go off and say, yes, I've completed a certified design course, and go off and, you know, present themselves as a permaculture designer, hopefully.
What kind of stuff do you cover with them?
Oh, all kinds of topics. We talk about the big picture of ecology and ethics, and then we look at various principles and how to design, and look at placement of the house relative to the homestead, and mapping the landscape. And the group has been broken up into 4 groups, and each one of them is taking a piece of land on some adjacent property and doing a design as if they're working for a client with specific parameters. And they're designing house, maybe gardens, whatever, with that in mind. And that will be kind of the final project, is having actual map with an idea and some written material to complement it.
And this is part of, you mentioned that this pond is part of your teaching?
Yeah, well, there's classroom and theoretical stuff, and we have bring in guest speakers, but then we also have a number of hands-on projects, and they serve 2 purposes. They're educational. Sometimes they're sitting too long in a classroom becomes a little bit tiresome. You can only absorb so much information. And they're also helping us get something done with lots of hands. So we've got to think of projects that are appropriate to many hands. Some projects are, some projects aren't. This pond was dug when we first came here 26 years ago. And we kept thinking, wouldn't it be nice to turn it into a pond and line it? So finally, after all this time, we've just recently put in some padding, liner, rocks, plants. And it's going to act as a nursery for aquatic plants. So most of these plants you see here are in pots. Some of them, so they don't spread too much, and we can also take them out, transplant them, divide them. So the whole profile of this pond is one of shelves going down, so we can access different levels. And eventually we'll cover it with soil, and the edge will get covered, and you won't see any of the liner. It will look relatively natural. And there is a pond that we did about 4 years ago right down there. If you would like to take a quick shot of that when you're done, just to get the idea of the progression.
Of what this will become as the plantings go on. Now you're doing that up here where it's a much, up on the ridge, or not the ridge, but close to the ridge, where it's a much drier, rockier. We've got fir trees and a different eco niche, I guess you would
It's
say.
very dry up here. Yeah, we live in a microclimate here in the San Juan Islands, but besides that, living in a place like this, it's like a microclimate within a microclimate. Dry, south-facing, rocky. The soils are quick draining, so up here, plants just basically survive through the winter. So creating little pockets of moisture like this, create little cool oases. We can use them for irrigation, although we don't want to drop the water level too much. They're also great havens for wildlife, because you could go off in those directions quite a ways and not find any standing water. So birds are going to be coming here to get water. That's kind of a natural thing.
And what is feeding this? Where's your
Well,
water
this
source?
water is coming up from the marsh.
Okay.
And the solar pumping that you just saw in the last, or in a previous shot was
Bringing the
that water will be coming to here as we improve our pumping technology. So eventually we'll have a system that will pump water from the bottom to the top any way the sun's shining, and that's a lift of about 100 feet. And in theory we could even potentially have even a water course moving down the hill and spreading moisture, green plantings on the side of it. So that would be the ideal.
Wow.
We'll see if we can get that way, just how far we can tweak the technology.
Well, you're thinking in the 700-year frame. I expect, it might happen, depending on the weather.
Right. But even by creating this now and having lined little water courses between the ponds and catching some roof water up here, in the winter we could easily have a little water course.
Sure.
Because this pond is 100% catchment. There's no absorption. Any inch of rain hitting this is going to eventually flow off.
Yeah.
And we have another pond above it, so eventually that is not yet lined. So we could have a really kind of a little, almost
Nice.
riparian little aquatic zone here in what would normally be an incredibly dry place. So we will see.
We'll have to come back in 5, 10, 20 years and take a look and see what's happening.
That sounds good. All right.
We're up here on the hillside, just sort of overlooking what you've got in your marsh, your pond. What are we seeing?
Well,
Everything.
everything. That's my brother's wife. We didn't get to meet her, but yeah, we're about probably 60 to 80 feet up above the water level of the marsh, and it kind of gives you a little overview of the contrast. Down there it's lush, green, wet. Up here
It's rocky.
open, rocky. However, we do have
Right.
trees. There is little pockets of soil here and there that allow us to have this forest cover, and thank God, because if it wasn't for that, it would be quite bright and quite hot up here. So it's nice having these two distinctly contrasting landscapes. And when we came here, some people said, oh, that's not really agricultural land because it wasn't flat, it wasn't plowable, but for us it was much more interesting. Many more options, and sometimes I think it's important to break our concept of what is agricultural land in order to move ahead. A lot of people who are doing homesteading here and there aren't on prime, Class A, bottomland soils. And one thing too that should be considered in a climate like this, which can be cool, being up on the rocks, you actually get a lot more heat accumulation. Or this is a west-facing stone wall, so right down there it gets hot. So maybe if we're going peaches or grapes or things like that need a little more heat, that little bumper might be just the thing they need. A lot of people know this from growing tomatoes like against a south-facing wall or something like that.
So what he's talking about now is known as using a zone analysis. I'm sorry, sector analysis. So we already been through zone analysis. That's how much effort do you need to put into a given sort of crop or animal that you're tending to, and using that to locate it closer or further from your homestead. But the sector analysis looks at where the various things like wind and sun and rain are going to come from, where the water flows, all the flows of energy and material in and out of your system, where that comes from, and then planting accordingly. So he talked about having a really sunny spot for his tomatoes on the south-facing slope. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, south-facing is going to be the hottest part of any bit of land or property. It's the way that you want to orient your windows if you have a greenhouse, because you're going to get the sun at the height of its day, whether it's winter or summer. You're going to get maximum solar penetration. If you're doing indoor growing, and you'll just get maximum solar effect, solar radiation if it's outside. So you want to put the stuff that wants the hottest part of the day, which really thrives in the hottest environment, on that south-facing slope. If it was something that needed a little bit more shelter, you could put it on the east or west side maybe. If it was something that needed a lot of shelter, that didn't mind frost even, you might put it on the north side of a slope, if you're talking about in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, everything's just reversed. And if you're in the equator, the tropics, that doesn't matter as much. That's usually not as much what you're looking for in terms of sector analysis. There it's more like flows of hot and cold and water and stuff like that, more so than the sun, because the sun more or less comes from the same area day in and day out. It's mostly just overhead. And if you get down to like the equator, it's basically 12 hours a day of sun, just about the same spot. It's going to wobble back and forth a little bit over the course of the year, but that's not as important. But in the more temperate regions, the higher latitudes, you're thinking about which side to face, depending on what sort of crop you want to grow, and that's called sector analysis.
Okay.
So we appreciate having all this contrast to our land. It adds a lot more diversity.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's wondrous what you are doing here. You thank you for the wonderful. I know this tour is just the top of what you've got going here.
There's a
with
lot.
thousands of plant species. And why do you do this? What do you love about it?
Well, I always like the idea of living with harmony with nature, and it's a peaceful place, that's for sure, but it's just so gratifying when you see something that you maybe nurtured
hear the
from a
rooster
little
crowing
tiny
in the
baby
background
and
there.
see it becoming finally a fully
cool.
productive individual. So that's part of it. That's kind of looking at the physical reality of the plants, and just seeing things come to fruition, things becoming bigger, flourishing, and with the idea that maybe these things are going to live way longer than I'm going to live. It's very satisfying in a world that's so fraught with uncertainties.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's the human connection. When we see people who come here, you guys, or we look at, the course participants right now, they go away with something that's much greater than simply a plan. They get maybe more than an idea. There's a sense of hope, to see that, it's not that hard. Really, it just takes a little bit of consistency in any particular direction. And I often say that it's not that this place is not a result of any individual genius on the part of Doug or Sam and I or our families. It's the fact that there's been three of us. and that we've had this consistency, which often doesn't exist. Many times people come to a place with huge dreams, a few years later, they're selling it and moving to some other part of the country.
You've stayed the course. You stayed the course, and you're getting to see some of the wonderful results.
Well, I think at some point, this idea of like finding a place and just like you can run, but you can't hide. Because there's always going to be some place this place has changed since we came here. And I can throw up my arms and whine about how it used to be, or whine how it is, but at some point you run out of places to run. So I'm kind of glad that we found a place that hasn't changed that much. We don't have encroaching suburbia or anything like that. So I think we'll see how it is in the next few years. We got another generation of kids who are enjoying the place. So it'll be nice to see them as they get older, how much they continue to appreciate it. And maybe everything that we've dreamed will just kind of keep on.
I think they'll keep on
going.
carrying it on and carrying it on. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
You're watching Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.
I really wish they had more high quality video. But this was 2007, so I guess HD was still relatively new at that point. But yeah, that's Peak Moment. They do a lot of cool stuff. You can go check them out. I will link you to them as well. I'll just put that in the chat. So that you can go check out Peak Moment right there. So yeah, so that's one of the more well-known permaculture homesteads in the U.S. anyway, the Bullock brothers, and they've done a lot of cool stuff. And as I said earlier, they are featured in the book Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway, the late Toby Hemingway, who is a really great permaculture practitioner. Tragically died in 2015, only I think in his early 50s. So he had a long career ahead of him that was tragically cut short. But he left behind some really good sources of information and thought. So Gaia's Garden is one of them for sure. So if you want to know more about them, that's a really good place to go. And you can also go to their website. I don't know that I have that open anymore. But yeah, if you just search for the Bullock Brothers, you'll be able to find them. So let's see, we're at only 7:53. So I think we'll move into the next video. I have a whole playlist here. And I can even link that at some point here. But we'll move on. Let's see. We have gone through 51 of the videos now of 69. Nice. So we'll move on to look at how Sepp Holzer does his permaculture homestead. And he's an Austrian man. Kind of an interesting character in the world of permaculture, to say the least. So this will be about his Sepp Holzer's mountain permaculture farm. He really is into building ponds as ways to catch and store energy, and he kind of builds his entire operation around the use of ponds. So he lives in an alpine area of Austria, I believe. So yeah, let's take a look at some of his ideas about permaculture and homesteading.
The Kremeterhof is Europe's most well-established and oldest permaculture farm, set up by Sepp Holzer. It's now run by Joseph, his son, for the last 3 years, so we've come to get an up-to-date view of what's going on at the Kremeterhof these days.
Okay, vielleicht ein paar grundlegende Dinge zu unserem Hof. Unser Hof hat ca. 45 Hektar und hat ca. 400 Höhenmeter Höhendifferenz.
You know what? I'm going to make this a little bit larger. I'm going to minimize my own picture right there. In fact, we'll make it as large as possible because those are very faint closed captionings, and I don't think you're really going to get the essence of it, unless you happen to know German. But otherwise, you're probably not going to get the essence of what's being said without it. So I'll just make it a little bit larger there for you so we can follow along. But anyway, let me just share the link to this video before we continue on. So you can check out the current video right now. And there you go. Go check it out. If you're not able to watch all of it tonight, I'll continue on.
In diesen 45 Hektar. Er beginnt unten im Tal bei knapp 1100 Meter und geht dann bis hinauf auf
I'm gonna bump up the quality. Hopefully that's a little, yeah,
diese
that's a lot
400
more
Meter
clear.
Höhendifferenz sind natürlich, was die Bewirtschaftung betrifft, etwas
So 400-meter
schwieriger.
difference in
Das
elevation
Gelände
from
ist sehr
top to
klein,
bottom
wenn
of
man
this
sich hier mal da
property.
runterschaut.
So
Man
we're talking about
geht
very
hoch
steep
und ins Tal hinunter.
alpine
Das
area.
heißt, wir haben
With
doch
probably
ein
some
sehr
lupin there,
steiles Gelände,
or lupine,
das
depending on how you
manches
pronounce
schwieriger
it.
macht, aber manches
Very beautiful
auch
wildflowers.
manche Vorteile mit sich bringt. So haben wir unter anderem
So there you see one of his
Teichsysteme,
famous
wie wir
ponds
sie
that
schon
he
gesehen
likes.
haben, wo wir ganz einfach mit Schwerkraft arbeiten können. Dasselbe ist, wir können mit dem Wasser beispielsweise sogar Elektrizität
Also
erzeugen.
make electricity with the water wheel. That's
Durch
cool.
diesen Höhenunterschied. Und wir nutzen auch den Höhenunterschied aus, um quasi unsere Erntezeiten etwas zu strecken. Ja, es macht einen Unterschied, ob wir unten auf knapp 1100 Meter arbeiten oder auf 1500 Meter. Und da können wir etwas Zeit gewinnen. Was natürlich ganz wichtig ist, bei diesem Gelände, dass wir mit Terrassen arbeiten.
Oh
So
yeah,
haben
I
wir
bet
die
they are really
Möglichkeit,
small on the
überhaupt
iPhone.
Anbau zu betreiben. Und unser Niederschlag liegt hier bei
Even
knapp
attempt.
750
No,
mm.
there's no other
Das heißt,
closed captioning for this
nicht
one.
sehr wenig, aber auch nicht besonders viel. Mit ein Grund, wieso wir so darauf achten müssen, dass wir unser Wasser möglichst lange hier halten, und auch mit ein Grund, wieso der Anbau auf Terrassen, wo man das Wasser gut speichern kann, bei uns sehr wichtig ist. Von der Temperatur her schaut es so aus, dass wir eine Jahresdurchschnittstemperatur von 5 Grad Celsius haben.
So the average temperature is only just above
Relativ
freezing.
wenig.
It says 5 Celsius.
5 Grad Celsius bedeutet dann, damit man sich was vorstellen kann,
But in
bei
perspective,
uns
we have only
in etwa,
1.7 days
lassen wir
over
uns
30
statistischen
Celsius.
Daten 1,7 heiße Tage.
That's a pretty
über 30
chilly area.
Tage im Jahr.
That's very alpine in
Circa
climate.
25 Sommertage.
And 25 days over 25
Grad im Jahr,
Celsius.
aber dafür circa 100
And about 160 days of frost and ice days.
und
Wow.
Eistage,
Wow.
in denen zumindest Frost ist und glaub,
And 50 days of ice where there's no water flow at all.
an denen es nie
Oh, interesting.
Plusgrade hat.
So most of the time it's just kind of frost, but not quite frozen solid.
Wir sind jetzt gerade ziemlich an der oberen Grenze unseres Grundstücks und sind jetzt da bei einer unserer Teichanlagen.
Next to one of our many pond systems,
Wasser
he
ist für
says.
uns wahrscheinlich die wichtigste
Water is one of our
Ressource.
most important
Und wir
resources.
versuchen das Wasser so
We
gut
try
wie
to
möglich
use the
bei uns zu
water
nutzen,
and
so
keep
lange wie
it
möglich
on
auf
our
dem
landscape.
Grundstück zu haben.
Yeah, too
Und
cold for
zwar
my
ist es
bones
so,
too,
dass
Natalie.
unsere ganzen Teiche
All our ponds fill with spring water.
sind mit Quellwasser gespeist und wir haben relativ wenig
We don't
Wasser
have
und
so
wir
much
müssen unsere
water,
Quellen
so we
einfach
try to
gut
use it
einsetzen für unsere
effectively.
Teiche.
That's one of the ways that
Wir
you
sammeln
can
das
use
Wasser und
catching and
arbeiten
storing
mit
energy.
Teichsystemen.
And he
Das
says, so we
heißt,
collect
wir,
water, and the
transportieren
water
das
cascades
Wasser
from
von
one
einem
pond
Teich
to the
zum nächsten
next.
und bauen
And
Teichsysteme auf, mit denen wir arbeiten.
from that we have built up
Das
this
ist
pond
ganz ein
system.
wesentlicher Punkt,
That is
weil es
really
wirklich darum
a
geht,
really
das
important
Wasser
point.
gut zu nutzen
To
und so lange
obtain a
wie möglich
yield
am
from
Grundstück zu
water
halten.
and retain it
Da
on the
geht's also
landscape
wirklich
as much as
darum, dass wir
possible.
mit dem Wasser
Again, using that
an
catch
den
and store energy principle.
höchstmöglichen Stellen
So we start with the water at the highest
und das
point.
dann über unser gesamtes Grundstück verteilen. Und man
You can
sieht
see
hier
the difference
eben
between these different
unseren
ponds here now.
höchstgelegenen Teich. Ja, und
So
von
this is
dem
the
gehen wir
highest
jetzt da mit
pond,
unseren Teichsystemen
which feeds
quasi
all of the others.
über unser ganzes Grundstück nach unten. Ganz ein wesentlicher Punkt.
A very
beim
important
Teichen
aspect is
dass
having a
man,
lot of structure
sehr viel
in the
Struktur drinnen
ponds.
hat. Unsere Teiche
Our pond,
sind Teichwirtschaft im
our
Sinne
economies,
von,
if you like.
wir bewirtschaften die Teiche mit
In a
dem
sense, they all produce something of benefit.
mit der eigenen Produktivität. Das heißt, es geht darum,
What a pond
was
can
der
produce,
Teich
we can use.
produzieren
Oh,
kann,
little
ja,
tadpoles there, that's
nutzen
cool.
wir. Wir versuchen in diese Teiche.
We aim to have no
wir geben
inputs
nicht
such as
extra
food
Futter
and
oder
etc.,
von außen
so
was
they're not
hinein,
feeding any of
sondern
the
wir
fish.
arbeiten mit
We
dem,
work with the natural productivity
Produktivität
of the
des Teiches
pond.
selbst. Und da ist es ganz wesentlich,
So if the
dass
structure
wir,
is vital to
einfach
supply
sehr viel
that,
Struktur drin haben. Man braucht einfach die sehr
you need
produktiven
flat
Flachbereiche.
zones
Man braucht dann aber natürlich auch die
and
Tiefzonen,
deep areas
um
for
für
the
die
fish
Fische und für die ganzen Wassertiere eben genügend
and other life.
Wasservolumen zu
Regardless,
haben, die richtige
a
Wassertemperatur
regulated
zu haben
temperature
und
and a
natürlich auch
climate
die
is really
Möglichkeit haben,
important.
zu
In order to
zu
survive the
überwintern.
harsh
Das ist
winter,
ja im Winter
here we have
im
it's
Prinzip
really
alles
frozen.
zugefroren.
We're creating
Und
this
möglichst
optimal
viel Struktur
structure.
zu haben, ihr seht es, haben wir hier eigentlich überall Flachzonen.
Like here
die
with the
auch
flat
in diesen
zones and the
Stöcken
sunken
drinnen, weil
trees.
wir mit unseren Teichen
And I take it he means by flat zones, he means marshlands, basically, kind of the very, very slight shallows that you can still have vegetation growing in. And so it says he says it allows them to have both fish and crayfish or crawfish or crawdads, depending on where in the world you're from.
Neben Fischen vor allem auch Krebse produzieren. Krebse sind eine ganz wesentliche
Crayfish are a local species, which is important.
Das ist unser heimischer Flusskrebs. Und
Another important point, we're working with
eine
these
ganz wesentliche
systems,
Sache ist,
when working
wenn
with
man
these systems,
hier mit dieser Struktur arbeitet,
is to incorporate
man
the
kann bei
edges of
Teichsystemen
the pond. So
am
here we have that edge effect
Hang,
again.
da sehr gut mit Systemen
And
arbeiten.
build
Es ist-
system around
Es ist
them.
schwierig bei uns große Teiche zu machen. Das ist klar.
So
weil es
interesting
steil
thing
ist. Aber
about
es ist-
lupine there. I'm gonna back it up just a tick. There we go. The lupine, these beautiful blue flowers, is they a member of the pea and bean family. So they are nitrogen fixers, which means they take nitrogen from the air and through a relationship with symbiotic bacteria. I don't know if it's rhizobum for all of the different species of peas and beans, but it is for beans, I know for sure. It's called rhizobium. Rhizobium? That sounds about right. But anyway, it's this bacteria that's endemic to these particular species. And that bacteria takes the nitrogen and converts it into a usable plant food and gives it to the plant. So it's like free fertilizer from the air. Nitrogen is one of the most key ingredients to any sort of fertilizer application. You have your nitrogen, your potassium. I can never remember the third one. Nitrogen, potassium. Geez, there's another one. Anyway, it's really important and it's hard to get. Even though it's everywhere in the air, it's hard to get in a solid form unless you sometimes resort to things like fossil fuels to generate that sort of thing. What is that? Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. That's the third one. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are the three big ones when it comes to fertilizer. So it's taking one of those and through its natural systems, giving you free fertilizer straight from the air. I think that's pretty cool. And then you can plant plants next to it that are heavy nitrogen feeders that need a lot of that specific type of nutrient. And together they form this symbiotic relationship with one another. And especially with perennials like lupin, or I think it's lupin, whatever you call the flower, lupin, lupine, whatever. I believe it's a perennial. So it comes back year after year. And the cool thing about perennials is that they tend to have longer roots, and those roots, year by year, some of them will die off. They just kind of self-prune them based on what their needs are. And each root that they prune off is a whole column of nitrogen that's just left over for other plants to enjoy. So it's a really nice symbiotic relationship. They just build nutrition into the soil as they go. It does look like those are on the banks of the Wetter Marsh area. Natalie had asked the question. Yeah, beautiful blues. One of my favorite plants. And there's actually a species that's native to Minnesota. And I don't know if all lupins do it this way, but this one in particular, it has this system where the seeds, the seeds are where the flowers are right now that you see. And as those seeds dry out, there's some sort of action that winds them up, basically like a spring or rubber band. And then as soon as something hits against them, they'll spring out and they'll like shoot, up to like 20 feet. And that's one of the ways that they spread themselves out across the landscape. I just think it's kind of cool. But anyway, let's continue on.
Große Teiche zu machen. Das ist klar, weil es steil ist. Aber
So we
es
cannot
ist
use big
sehr
ponds
leicht dafür, mehrere Teiche
here
quasi
because of the slope.
in ein System zu
I
bringen.
really,
Und ich
sorry
kann
about
also
that. I
Teich-
really do not like these closed captionings they have. Unfortunately, there's no other closed captioning option for this video. But if they, depending on the landscape they're putting it in front of, it's rather difficult. So I'm going to try that one again.
Mit Systemen arbeiten. Also es ist schwierig bei uns große Teiche zu machen. Das ist klar, weil es steil ist.
We cannot
Aber
use
es
the big ponds here
ist sehr
because the
leicht
slope,
dafür, mehrere Teiche quasi
I cannot read
in
that.
ein System zu bringen.
But it's easy
Und
to
ich kann also
something,
Teiche
sorry.
haben, die,
We can have one pond for
einen
one
Zweck
reason,
erfüllen,
e.g. production,
quasi
flat
die
zones.
Flachzone, und ich kann den nächsten Teich haben,
Cannot see these
der
closed
vielleicht ein
captionings,
bisschen mehr
I'm
den anderen
sorry.
Zweck erfüllt, etwas
And the deeper
proaktiver
ponds for
ist,
bigger
etwas mehr
fish.
für die Fische ist, und ich kann diese Teiche einfach irrsinnig gut kombinieren. Das ist ein Riesenvorteil.
Yeah, they don't need to rely on the birds
Also ich
as
arbeite
much.
hier, ich kann es dann später noch einmal ganz
So I
kurz
will show you
zeigen.
later when we
Ich kann
see
quasi
all the
diese
different levels of the
Struktur
pond.
am Hang in mehrere
The ponds.
Etagen aufteilen. Und das ist ein System, mit dem wir hier auch arbeiten. Also wir werden uns jetzt
We're going to
einige
take a
unserer
look at
Teiche
various
mal
other
anschauen.
ponds.
Wir
We
haben hier
have
hauptsächlich,
crayfish.
wie gesagt, Krebse. Von den Raubfischen
We
haben
have
wir
predator fish
bisschen
like trout,
Forellen,
pike,
relativ
and
wenig,
zander. I'm not familiar with zander.
Hecht und Zander. Und von den
As
Friedfischen,
well as our
als
main stock
Hauptfische,
of
die wir
herbivore
produzieren,
species
haben wir
like
Karpfen und Schleien.
tench and carp.
Wobei bei uns vor allem
Overall, the
Krebse
crayfish are the
sozusagen
main
das
species. Wow, they must
Hauptthema
really
sind.
produce a lot.
Und gerade der Edelkrebs
That needs a
braucht-
lot of
Krebse
structure in the
brauchen sehr viel
ponds,
Struktur.
and that's the function of what you see here.
In diesen Teichen. Also das ist hier quasi ein Krebsteich.
This crayfish pond also
ohne-
has a small amount of
sind aber
trout, which
Forellen
is
drinnen,
its only predator.
sonst keine Raubfische. Der
It
produziert
produces
sehr
a
viel
lot of
Futter.
food, and then downhill,
Die
there are
Teiche,
many
die
more
darunter
predator
liegen, sind wieder
species.
eher Raubfischteiche. Und so arbeiten wir in dem System. Hier kann sie
This is how the
sehr viel
system
Futter
works.
aufbauen und
Abundant
produzieren.
food source
Und
up
in
here can
Teichen,
be
die
distributed
darunter liegen,
down through
wird
the
da wieder ein
ponds
Teil
below.
davon abgeschöpft.
So using the natural
So,
gravity
das
flow
sind
of the
Erfahrungen
water
von
to
Tiere.
distribute nutrients
Und
and
zwar,
stuff.
wir
So
haben
here we have various
verschiedene
animals
Tiersorten drauf.
here
Wir
on the
haben,
farm.
Rinder,
We have cows,
Lämmer,
horses, and
Pferde,
pigs.
wir haben Schafe, wir haben Schweine. Die anderen werden wir dann später noch sehen. Die
We keep all the animals
Tiere sind
outside
bei
all
uns
year
das ganze Jahr in
round,
Freilandhaltung.
which,
Das heißt,
you know,
das ganze
that
Jahr
means
draußen
the
in
whole
Freiland
year.
Weidehaltung.
So they're not putting them in barns or at all, or anything, any other sort of enclosure. I mean, it sounds like they have just mild enough of a climate that you can really do that with a lot of species. But one thing about that is that means you don't have to invest in large outbuildings, large barns, and that sort of thing. They kind of just do as they please. I'm sure he's rotating them around in some sort of a rotational system so that he's not over, and none of the animals are overgrazing any given spot. But without having to build these large pieces of infrastructure, you can save yourself a lot of money, a lot of time and headache trying to repair these structures and keep them up to code. You don't have to worry about getting permission from a local town council to build more buildings. It's one of those things where we ask, as they do in a guy will cover in probably the next stream, maybe the one after, but Masanobu Fukuoka, who came up with the one straw revolution technique, very very similar to permaculture, kind of co-developed similar strategies to permaculture in Japan instead of Australia, which is where permaculture came from, and they didn't know about each other. It was those things that kind of spontaneously arose at the same time. And his big question all the time is, what can we not do? How can we save ourselves labor and hassle and future headache by not intervening in the landscape? So here we have them not building farmhouses, and it looks like it's working out pretty well. Like all those animals that we've seen so far look well cared for, look healthy. They look like they're living kind of their best life, you know? It's not every animal's aspiration to live indoors for most of the time.
Wir haben deshalb sehr robuste Rassen, beziehungsweise auch
We chose
relativ
robust
kleine
breeds.
Tiere,
These cattle
weil
are
wir
small.
ja auf unserem Hang die Tiere in der Freilandhaltung
Yep. You can't do the crayfish,
so haben
Natalie.
möchten,
That's
dass
too
wir
bad. I
keine
love
Schäden
crayfish.
machen. Deshalb möchte ich relativ kleine Tiere haben,
They're so good. The smaller animals have
die
less
nicht jetzt
impact on the steep land,
aufgrund ihres Gewichts
so it's another
viele
benefit,
Trittschäden
both
produzieren.
hardy and
Wir
less
werden uns das
impact.
noch anschauen. Wir
We'll
werden hier
see
mit
as they
Terrassen-
explore on the terrace slope. Oh, I didn't catch all that. Which from the edges between
Enge der
the annual
Terrassen sind immer
crops
gesichert
and the
mit
flat
einem-
terraces.
mit einem Art Mittelwald.
It's got kind of a stepwise
Und
system
das
that
wird
goes
auch
down
beweidet. Und dafür
little by
brauchen wir
little
auch
in
vor allem die Tiere.
relatively
Die Tiere
flat
sind immer-
terraces.
beweiden quasi immer die Hangflächen
So it
zu unseren
provides good
Terrassen.
grazing
Und,
year round,
sind also ständig
their
draußen,
systems
sind
here.
ständig im Hang und deshalb sollten sie wie
So
gesagt,
we always,
hier sind unsere Rinder.
yeah, I
Und
really
zwar
apologize
ist
for
das eine-
captioning. Our cattle are a cross between more local dwarf breeds and Scottish Highland cattle. Interesting.
Schottischen Hochlandrindern und die hat sich bei uns als sehr,
And
sehr
they
gut,
have been very valuable to us.
also unser Ziel ist es möglichst ein kleines.
Our aim is a small cow that is robust.
Weidetiere sind ein
Animals here
wesentlicher
are a
Teil
very important part of the
der
ecology.
Berglandwirtschaft. Das ist
And hey,
ganz
just one
eine
second
wichtige
on,
Sache, weil
we'll pause on that concept. To have a full functioning ecosystem, you can't exclude animals. Getting some disruption in my connectivity for a second there. Hopefully you're still all with me. Yeah, they must be cold hardy. I think that's what they're breeding them for, especially when you talked about the Scottish Highland. If you've ever seen them, very shaggy, especially on their heads. Definitely bred for the cold, windy Scottish Highlands. So you have to have animals in your system for it to be a fully functional ecology. ecological system. And that can be birds, that can be larger herbivores like cattle, it could be goats, it could be chickens, or it could just be wild animals that come in and out of the system. But you can't exclude animals. They're an invaluable part of the animal kingdom. They all provide their own ecological services. Even if all you had was the wild birds coming in, as they feed on stuff, on your farm, they're going to leave behind some fertilizer in the form of their poop. And that's a way to get free fertilizer. So it could be even advantageous to attract certain types of animals onto your farm just for the services that they provide. You could also provide things for like swallows. If you provide housing for swallows and you have some big open fields, that's the perfect habitat for swallows to go out hunting bugs. You can help keep the bug population in check. But you can't do without animals. That's not to say that you have to eat the animals that are in the system. You could even grow cows and pigs and stuff like that and just very carefully manage their breeding so they don't get overcrowded. And you could do things in a what's known as a veganic permaculture sort of a way. So that's possible too. I don't want you to think that it's only you have to raise things for meat and then you have to use them for that purpose. Depending on your ethics, where you're coming from, you can really design the systems to both fit your own needs and wants and produce the sort of things that you want at the same time. And produce things that you just let do their thing without ever really bothering them too much. On the other hand, if you want to harvest them, this is probably the most sustainable way to do it, is to have them out on pasture, if we're talking about cows or pigs or even chickens. Basically, I mean, when you hear the term free range, you have the idea of like the bison migrating across the countryside. This is more, we're in these systems usually trying to mimic the natural behaviors of herd animals. So you might move them from pen to pen to pen. It could be once a day, once a week, whatever, but you're bunching them all together. Usually, it's usually a technique called mob grazing, where you put them all together so they're eating down not just the stuff that they like the most, but the stuff that, they're sampling widely, so that nothing is getting overgrazed. And then you move on to the next paddock and the next paddock. So that's that sort of thing. So if you wanted to harvest meat from the system, that would definitely be one way that you could do it. So Natalie says, bats and bat boxes are great. Awesome insect control. Almost no better insect control than bats, because they're out when most of the flying insects are at the same time, especially mosquitoes. You hate mosquitoes, you should really love bats. Kind of getting a bad rap lately, though. Yeah, well, I mean, from time to time, people get all up in arms about bats because of all the mammals, they are the most likely to carry rabies. And it has to do with the way that they raise their young in the caves, where they're all kind of clustered on the top. So anytime one of them falls, there's a better chance that it's going to get bitten by something like a skunk or a possum or something that's wandering into the cave that could transmit the rabies to them. And then they go up and perhaps they bite their neighbors as they're just fighting or jockeying for position in the cave, and it spreads and it's not great. But overall, they're very unlikely to carry that sort of disease. Also, you had a bat box up and they still preferred the garage. Yeah. Probably the garage was a little bit better sheltered. Wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason they chose that. But that's cool, Natalie. But anyway, yeah, getting a little bit off on a tangent, so let's refocus.
Weil wir sehr viele Flächen haben,
So we have a lot of flat strips of land that we utilize the animals on.
ja, wir haben sehr viele steile Hänge,
We have
sehr viele
steep edges
Waldflächen,
and tree crops
die
that we
man
graze them on
hier
too.
nutzen kann in Form der Waldweide.
Yeah, trees can also be grazing.
Sozusagen Flächen
Making
zu
good
nutzen, die
use of
ansonsten
marginal
nicht
land.
nötig
There's
wären.
that valuing the marginal
Wir
and the edges
brauchen
again. We need to say space for the animals to
Weideflächen für
graze.
Tiere und gleichzeitig, damit man hier nicht reine freie Weideflächen hat, sondern eine
It's not
Mehrfachnutzung
just for
hat,
grazing, so they're
kombinieren
combining
wir das
it with
mit
the
einem
forest
Waldsystem.
systems.
Das heißt, es geht uns hier wirklich um eine
So this can be so we're combining ecologies like agroforestry with grazing to receive multiple benefits. Yeah, there's that, again, that's using the marginal and the edges. That's value diversity. That's all these sorts of things. So hugel beds, this is one of the things that Sepp Holzer is most known for promoting. He didn't create the system, but it is a technique that you can use to create a berm, especially if you're in a place that doesn't have necessarily a lot of topsoil. Say you're in the northeast, like Maine of the United States, where you have maybe just an inch, maybe even less of topsoil. So you don't maybe have a lot of that you can scrape off in order to make this berm. What you can do is cut down some trees or get wood from somewhere, and then that forms the core of your berm. And then you just spread a thin layer of the soil across the top, and there you have a berm with locally available resources. And the idea, again, is to trap the water as it flows across the landscape and also provide a diversity of zones. So at the bottom of the berm, of course, is going to be the wettest part. So you put your most wet-tolerant plants at the bottom of the berm. And then the driest part is, of course, going to be on top of the mound. So you put your more arid-loving plants up there. So even if you get a big downpour, it's going to drain off real quick and you won't suffocate and rot those roots. So you have a whole bunch of different climates, microclimates that you can have all in a very tight space. That's, again, valuing the edge and also valuing diversity. So you're creating a whole lot of edge just by adding a little bit of texture to the land. And that's one way to do it. When I had Mike Hogue on the program, a really great permaculture friend of mine, he talked about using a similar technique, but where you don't cover the logs with earth. It's called a nurse log technique. So you just fell the trees and then you drag the logs out onto the land. It acts as a berm. Stuff starts to build up behind it, and eventually you have the same outcome. You have a berm, a mound of dirt that collects water and has different microclimates. And the benefit of doing it that way is that with the berm, you're putting a lot of carbon into the soil all at the same time. And if you know anything about composting, the microorganisms that are the best at composting need a balance between carbon and nitrogen. Nitrogen's more like the green stuff, the fresh living stuff. So they need to balance. So in order to balance out their system with so much carbon in it, they draw nitrogen out of the local soil. And for the first few years, it's not great to plant into. Basically, what you do then is you take these nitrogen fixing plants like your beans and your peas and stuff like that. You plant that into the system for the first few years, and all the extra available nitrogen gets siphoned out into breaking down the wood core. But the idea behind this, especially with the hugel culture, is at the end of the whole process, once all that carbon has been, basically mulched, what you have is a big sponge to the point where now you have water moving across the land and being collected up against the berm, but then being absorbed into that formerly wood core that's now just spongy carbonous material. And it really holds onto that water well, and it even wicks it up through the top of the mound more. So then at that point, once the thing is really going, remember that small and slow solutions, we're starting with a lot of effort, and then as time goes on, less and less. So having to put all kinds of inputs into it to get it going, all that extra nitrogen, the nitrogen fixing plants and all that, once it really is starting to hum along and it becomes the sponge, now not only do you not have to have those extra nitrogen inputs, but you don't have to really water it. And depending on your climate, you might get away with not watering it at all, or maybe once a season, because it's just naturally going to do its spongy, earth mound sort of thing from that point on. So that's the end goal of using these, what's called hugel. And it's a very difficult word for my American voice to say, but it's hugel culture, Hugelkulture. So I believe it actually is a German word. As far as I know, Sepp Holzer didn't pioneer this concept all himself, but he definitely relies on it a lot. He's one of the biggest boosters of this technique worldwide. So here you can cultivate, and the trees secure the banks, so they're going to hold the soil in place. So we have the berries for these trees, and marmalade and schnapps, amongst other things. That's what they're using the berries for. That's funny.
der Bereich zwischen den Bäumen
The animals
wird
can graze
von den
between the
Tieren
trees,
wieder
which
freigehalten,
helps
dass
with
er umgehen
harvesting.
kann und das auch ernten kann. Ja? Ohne
So they're
Pflege
keeping the weeds down a little bit
würde aus diesem
without
Wasser
having to
eng
till. So it
und
said
endlich
without
ein Wald
managing this
werden, den wir
bank, it would
nicht
soon be
nutzen. Wir
overgrown
brauchen aber einen
and we
Wald,
wouldn't be
den wir
able to grow
landwirtschaftlich auch
anything.
nutzen können.
We also need land for
Das ist ein ganz
cropping.
wesentlicher Punkt.
That's the
Das heißt,
point.
die Tiere sind ein
So
ganz
yeah, here
wesentlicher
you have more of
Bestandteil, ja,
a traditional agriculture system. Back it up just a second so we can look at it.
ein Wald werden, den wir nicht mehr nutzen können. Wir brauchen aber einen Wald, den
So
wir
yeah, you can see
landwirtschaftlich
the
nutzen.
furrows in the ground. So they're still doing some tilling techniques. And that's the thing. Permaculture is very non-prescriptive. It doesn't say you have to use this, and that technique. It's more about looking at your landscape, trying to figure out what you want to get out of it and at what scale, and then adapting your techniques to fit that in a way that uses the least amount of inputs and gets the biggest output back from it. So they apparently have determined that in this case, in particular, it's okay to till this little bit of land and plant it with more traditional crops. But that may not be something you ever do on your land. In fact, I mean, I personally would hope you wouldn't do that sort of thing for the reasons I've stated earlier. Breaks up that mycelium, the living soil, the fungus, the bacteria, all that stuff. It kills the living soil, which is your most important asset. It's what keeps your plants healthy. It's what keeps the right nutrients in balance for them to keep growing. It's what holds on to the water and those nutrients the best. Because when soil becomes dead, everything just washes through it. You know, you put fertilizer down, it may be there for a while, but soon enough it washes through. When you have that layer of mycelium, the fungus and whatnot, that helps act also like a sponge and hold the water in place more, make it more available. So you really want to have that living soil. And one of the best ways to destroy it is to till. And then also look at this. We have now a vacuum in the eyes of nature. We've taken out all of the species, not just the ones that we don't like, but we've taken basically all the species of plants out. Nature's going to fill it with something. And of course, they're going to want to fill it with something too. So hopefully, I mean, you're kind of just hoping that your preferred species are going to win out, but there's nothing that says that they will. Now it's a competition. Instead of filling that niche and keeping it filled as much as possible, always avoiding bare soil, because there's another problem with bare soil in that it really is impacted by rain. The rain will compact it. It will be more susceptible to blow away and to run off in especially large rain events. So in my opinion, there's almost never a good reason to till the soil, especially since you also need then more heavy machinery. It's a lot more of these systems that you're having to maintain and to use money and effort and time to maintain, when nature will perform these functions for you if you set things up right. So personally, I'm not a fan of tilling, but in this case, they've determined it's okay for them, or at least at this point.
Und das ist ein ganz wesentlicher Punkt. Das heißt, die Tiere sind ein ganz wesentlicher Bestandteil. Ja? Sie pflegen für uns die Flächen und machen sie uns landwirtschaftlich nutzbar. Und das ist eine ganz wichtige kombinierte Nutzung. Die Terrassen,
So the terraces are the bushy edges.
Sind quasi, die Terrassen sind landwirtschaftlich.
Terraces for cropping, banks for tree yields. So you can see these alleyways that are formed of grazing land in between the rows of trees. It's kind of cool. Here the animals are clearing the marginal land on the banks, maintaining the fruit trees so that I can harvest. So they're performing the pruning that they otherwise would need to do. And the animals really are important on the hillside, performing additional functions in this ecology. Not least of which they add their manure to the soil, and just especially with cows, they tend to stomp around with their heavy hooves and work it into the soil. There's a technique you can do also where you move your cows from paddock to paddock, from small pasture to small pasture, and then a certain number of days later, you know that that fly larvae will have been laid into these cow patties, and they'll be emerging. And right at that time, you run chickens through, and there's a free meal for the chickens, who will scratch at that cow patty, break it up, and distribute out the fertilizer more across the land for free. Again, you're not having to do anything. You're just doing timing. That's the only input that you are making, is timing when you're putting your animals through, and they're performing all these functions for you. They're fertilizing, they're getting rid of pests, and they're breaking up that fertilizer and distributing it more evenly across the land, all for free. And at the same time, assuming you're going to harvest some of these animals, you get that back as well. And so again, it's just looking, observing and interacting ecology, noticing these patterns through the land, and then fitting your system around the current patterns instead of trying to impose your entire will on a piece of property.
Einfach pflegen können, aber auch eine zusätzliche Nutzung haben. Ja. Wir arbeiten bei uns hier ja mit Anbau.
So here's a grain crop growing on one of the terraces.
Weil man am Steilhang einfach oder am Hang, ja,
these grasses species are important to the terraces. They both hold soil together well with their roots. They build up the soil and erosion and stop erosion when we are working on the land. And they're doing that for free. Water is slowed when it hits the terraces and can infiltrate better. Remember, it's catching and storing and sinking that energy, so it distributes out on the land more slowly. There's a reason that you'll see, and in construction sites a lot of the time when they're doing like a new on or off ramp on a highway, when they're trying to maintain and stabilize a soil embankment, they'll spray this green stuff down, and it's full of grass seeds. And the reason they do that is because it's a much more it's a very cost effective and efficient and long lasting way to stabilize that soil. Those grasses, just through doing their normal grassy lives, will send down their roots and stabilize the soil bank. And some grasses are very deep rooted, especially in the Midwest prairie here, and like in parts of Minnesota, Iowa, the rest of the Midwest. The reason the soil is so great is because there's a lot of very, very deep-rooted plants. We're talking 12 feet, 15 feet. I think the deepest rooted one, which is not a native but still grows really well here, is alfalfa. I think that can get down to about 20 feet into the soil. And especially when these grasses are perennial, so that you don't even have to seed them year after year. They just keep coming back. Again, every year, they're going to prune off a bit of their roots, and that becomes carbon in the soil. That starts storing more nutrients and more carbon in the soil very deep down, to the point where that's why places like Iowa will have 12 feet of topsoil in places, or even more. And your average other place has a few inches of topsoil. It's because of those perennial grasses. They're really the best thing to store carbon. They're one of the greatest carbon capture systems in the world, these grasslands, but also one of the most stabilizing forces, especially on these slopes. I just had let's see, Blazing Fool, thank you so much for following. We're talking about permaculture tonight, and right now we're looking at Sepp Holzer, an Austrian permaculture practitioner's farm. I believe this is his son, or it could just be a worker on his farm. He's kind of giving us a tour of the land. Let's continue on.
Das Wasser auch, weil ihm die Energie genommen wird, nichts abschwemmen kann. Dadurch es führt nicht zu einer Erosion.
Sorry,
Auf dieser
distracted
Terrasse
a little bit.
sehen wir jetzt zum Beispiel,
So this is old Russian rye variety.
das ist eine sehr anspruchslose Pflanze.
It's a very well adapted green for here on the high slopes, and it yields very well.
Hier in den Höhenlagen noch ganz tolle Erträge liefert. Wir arbeiten mit diesem Roggen.
We harvest this rye every 2 years.
Quasi zweijährig. Und zwar sehen
We seed it in early summer.
Frühsommer aus, lassen ihn im ersten Jahr.
We let it grow for the first year, then graze our cattle on it in late summer and autumn.
Nochmals, ja, oder beweiden ihn im Herbst, und im nächsten Jahr.
Then the following year, we harvest the grain.
Das hat den Vorteil, dass
So you're getting 2 yields out of the same land in just 2 years. You're getting fodder, which is food for animals, for the cattle, and then you get the grain crop. And I will say that one thing that a lot of permaculturists don't really touch on much is grain, kind of the staple crops, the carbohydrate family of plants, because it does take a lot of land, relatively speaking, and you almost always need to have basically a monocrop. There are some wild ways of cultivating it where you have different wild grasses, and virtually any grass that you see out there, you can eat the seeds of. So there's wild grass harvesting that you can do, so you could at least get away from the complete monocrop, What they could be doing is taking a bunch of native grasses and putting them all together, but still overall, to have enough of a harvest, you would still need to exclude most other types of plants in that field. So it's really cool to see him actually doing this. But you'll notice that these are just strips of grass. These are not, wide swaths. It's not taking up 100 acres. This is a small strip of grass. And again, let's think back to the idea of that edge effect. Because you have all these different plants on the edges of the grass, there's a much greater likelihood that some predatory insects and animals will be able to take up residence right next to where this grass is growing and help keep it relatively pest-free. And there again is another ecological service that you can have nature provide for you basically for free just by allowing things to happen as they normally do. That you then don't have to worry about things like spraying and tilling and, endless amounts of human inputs, which all cost money and time and energy and potentially ravage the rest of the ecosystem.
Schockt, ja, dass er konkurrenzstärker ist und dass er
So it grows better, stronger, and the weeds are outcompeted. So he's filling that niche.
Besser eindämmen kann und deshalb auch ohne Unkraut quasi
Without weed regulation, it's a very nice result without much effort.
Wenn wir es hier bei uns
Small and slow
einjährig machen
solutions
würden,
again.
hätten wir einen wesentlich
If we grew
höheren
it annually,
Aufwuchs an
there would be a lot more weeds and a lot less yield
würde
also.
nicht quasi so schön und leicht
Interesting.
ehrenbar wachsen.
So they've
Das heißt, das ist
observed the
ein ganz einfacher
patterns
Trick,
and they found a better
um
way
hier
of doing
quasi,
it. So it's a nice trick to grow it more naturally.
Das ist das Erste. Und der zweite Vorteil
Another
ist,
benefit is that you can use it
kannst du
twice,
natürlich auch mal nutzen.
as I was just saying,
Kannst
grazing
du
and
betreiben.
cropping.
Ich soll es sogar, ich muss
That's
es sogar,
really cool.
wenn ich es zweijährig mache, beweiden oder mähen. Also ich habe noch eine zusätzliche Nutzung.
As well as allowing the soil longer to regenerate from a disturbance, you end up with more humus building up. And humus is just the organic matter in soil. It's the organic component. An important reason to have small terraces,
in kleineren Terrassen arbeitet, dann hat man immer,
something that is not thought of often,
auf die oft nicht so gedacht wird, man hat aufgrund der
is that with small rows you have more diversity of plants. Yeah, that was what I was just mentioning there.
Man hat eigentlich immer die Randlinie, ihr habt zwar hier
Lots of edges. So they're still tilling it before they put the grass in. There's probably a better way that they could do it. But you can see the growth is very dense, and it was cut, and it grows back. Looks like some clover growing in there with it, another nitrogen fixer. It's very naturally suppressing weeds as it grows. Here on the either side, you have good diversity of plants. So with a small row crop on a small terrace, you never have the problems associated with monocultures. Yeah, you don't have the effect where something that's really adapted well to eating only one particular plant can just go out of control because there's nothing reining it in. Now you have other plants that can supply predators to help keep them in check. Now it's more difficult for them to just, plow their way, figuratively speaking, through an entire field. They have to follow these small strips, and there's more land in between each strip, so there's, again, less of a chance of having catastrophic, complete failure. But also it's just one more barrier to them getting out of control. So you're not going to ever have, the problems associated with mass predation of these crops. Any problems will be very contained regardless. And because we have these beneficial, diverse edges around the beds with no more than 2 meters to the middle, so 6 feet about, we always have the maximum amount of life on the ground, which is very important. You can see the other terraces. There was, I couldn't really read that over his shirt there. This is an example. These captions are really terrible. It's very important for us to have our own grass, our own grain. Yeah, definitely. It's too seldom thought about in permaculture systems. This is our one of our earth cellars where we made with materials available here, locally sourced materials, where we store our fruits and our vegetables. It's basically a root cellar, you know.
Der Riesenvorteil von Biokehren ist
Take
ganz
advantage
einfach,
of the
man
structure.
hat
We can
Temperatur
maintain
zum Lagern und hat auch
tight
recht
temperatures
die
for
ideale
strong
Luftfeuchtigkeit
produce
fürs
with
meiste
good humidity
Gemüse, also
levels
für den Großteil des Gemüses und für
without
den Großteil des Obstes.
using power.
Wir machen die
And the reason that works, excuse me, the reason that it stays basically the same temperature year round is because that's how the earth is. Once you get down more than a few feet, things are so dense that they change temperature very slowly. So by the time that it gets to the heat of summer, the subsoil is just starting to get up to maybe 55, 60, and by the time it gets to the cold of winter, you still have all that latent heat coming into the system from the top. So year round, it's usually between like 55, 65 underground. It's a really great way to have natural refrigeration. And again, like you're saying, you don't have to have the constant need of machines that if they fail, you have a potentially catastrophic failure. You could lose all your food. If it's the wrong time, you don't happen to catch it fast enough. It's working, again, with the natural systems, with the earth instead of against it.
Keller so, dass wir darauf achten, dass wir eine gute Entlüftung und eine gute Belüftung haben. Wobei die Entlüftung ist meistens in dem Fall ein
The
Rohr
chimney
an
is
der
up
höchsten Stelle. Ja?
on the highest
Und die
part.
Zulüftung läuft,
The air comes in from the underground, so it's cool,
das heißt, es gibt quasi
and
ein
it goes,
Zuluftrohr,
gets
das reinkommt
dehumidified
und
and passes
das
through a tube.
quasi als natürliche Luftentfeuchter dient. Also es geht dabei darum, dass
It's
man
all about
die
getting
Luft
a
schon auf
right
die
temperature of air
Kellertemperatur
coming into the
bringt, bevor
cellar,
sie im Keller ist.
say to around
Warme
8
Luft kann mehr
Celsius.
Luft oder mehr Wasser
Warm air
transportieren als
comes
kalte Luft.
more
Und wenn ich jetzt
humidity,
warme Luft mit
warm air comes more
hoher Luftfeuchtigkeit
humidity,
in den Keller
excuse me.
bringe,
And if we
die
bring
Luft
warm air
abkühlt, habe ich
in,
Kondenswasser.
it will
Und wenn
condense
also die
water,
Luft schon quasi im
and the
Rohr
cool air in the tube
unterirdisch
before
abkühlt,
it
bevor
reaches
es
the
in den Keller
cellar,
kommt, kondensiert
the
das Wasser
condensed
schon an
water
der
will
kalten
flow
Luft
back
warm
down the
vom Rohr
tube.
rinnt schon raus.
So they're keeping
das ganz
not only
einfach
temperature
mit
control, but it's
unserer,
humidity controlled. So it says it's very simple to dehumidify the air and cool this from producing an ideal climate here for storing things, basically.
Hier sieht man drei
Below us are
Terrassen,
3 terraces with
mit
fruit trees.
Obstbäumen, und zwar ist es so eine Art Streuobstwiese.
We also bring
die
animals
bewirtschaftet
in
wird
to
mit-
perform their functions.
Mit den Tieren. Ja, also da geht es jetzt wirklich darum, das ist Weide, zum Teil.
I'll get to that comment here. So Blazing Fool says they have a greenhouse up in Michigan, I believe, that grows oranges using air circulated through the tubes that are 8 feet under the ground. Air temperature stays at like 56 degrees. Yeah, it's really amazing. And for most plants, it really just needs to stay above freezing. You know, that's kind of the cutoff for a lot of the stuff, even tropical things. As long as it stays above freezing, and 56 is Fahrenheit is well above freezing, then you're okay. So taking advantage of this geothermal heat that is freely available as long as you just move air through it. It's a really great way to save a bunch of energy, and at the same time grow a lot of food that you couldn't otherwise grow. If it was like in Michigan, it's going to be usually below freezing in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, because of that constant temperature, think about having a air conditioner blowing 56 degree cool air, relatively cool air into your greenhouse in the summertime. It keeps things constant. Hello to you as well, the amazing Wolf Skeptic. How are you tonight? We're talking about permaculture, and this is Sepp Holzer. Oh, you remember me? Yeah, I think you have been in here before. I do remember you as well. So we're talking about permaculture tonight, and this is Sepp Holzer's homestead out in Austria. The anarcho-communist. That is me. Yep, I do a theory stream every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And in fact, this week we're going to start chapter 1 of Alexander Berkman's The ABC of Anarchy, also called What is Anarcho-Communism. It's been published under many names. But basically it's a super introductory text to anarchy and anarchism. Quick theory question, as long as it's really thick, not thick, as long as it's really quick, I should say, you can go ahead and ask your question. But I do need to get moving here. I only got 20 minutes left and about 15 minutes left of video to cover. So I'm trying to be done right around 9. That would be ideal for me. Can you grow more radical extreme, or can you go more radical extreme than anarchism? I guess it really depends on what your metric for radical and extreme is. There's plenty of communists who would say that anarchists are just liberals. And in fact, sometimes people that call themselves anarchists really just hate the government and don't really care too much to fight capitalism, which is unfortunate. I wouldn't say that's a common thread, but it's definitely one that happens. Far more left than anarchism. Again, it really depends on your spectrum and what you consider left versus right. But basically, as I understand it, the end state of communism, at least as we just went through, in fact, State and Revolution by Lenin. And the way that he laid out things is, you may have heard the concept of the withering away of the state. So basically, once you've gotten to socialism, where the people are directly controlling the means of production, eventually, once you have defeated the counter-revolutionaries, once things have spread out to the globe, and you have more of a global communism, things trend towards anarchism. You know, the withering away of the state is anarchism in its end state. People just naturally provide for each other. There's relative abundance and care for every person. And so to me, that says that anarchism is about as far left as you can go. As long as your definition of anarchism is a stateless, moneyless society. So can you be more anti-authoritarian than anarchism? No. And I don't generally like the framing it as authoritarian. It's more, how do you want to have power structured? Do you want to centralize it? It's still being controlled in communism as the worker state, right? So the people are still controlling that power, but it is more formalized and centralized as a power. It's still democratically decided upon. And that's what Lenin said. His ideal would be to have a representative form of democracy where the village or the neighborhood, if you're in a larger city, would be the smallest unit of government. You would more or less have direct democratic control over that small unit. You would be able to go to your local, neighborhood or village council meetings and vote on everything that came up. And then from that point, representatives from all the regional or the citywide bodies would then go up and talk about, would take those issues to the regional or the citywide body of government, and then up from there. And then at any point, if someone was trying to hoard too much power or take too much power for themselves, you could recall them. So basically, as he saw it, it was... and I don't think authoritarianism really fits that sort of a description. I mean, you could say it's authoritarian against capitalism because in a worker state, you are taking the needs of the people over the needs of individual business owners. They have much less power in that system, relatively speaking. They still have the same power as everybody else, but they don't have the outsized power to influence things like elections and policy to benefit their particular businesses. So in that way, you might conceive of that as being authoritarian, but I think more than anything, it's used as more of a scare word. But having said that, sure, the anarchist system of voluntary association and having, your local neighborhood or village or whatever being the only unit of government that you can't opt out of, right? So it would be the same sort of a structure, potentially. It's just that once you got beyond the very local level, things would be voluntary associations. So there would be it would be kind of like the UN, how UN resolutions are usually non-binding. Any one country can opt out of them. It's just a way of collaboratively working towards a common goal. So in an anarchist state, that would be a main difference. I think Kropotkin was even less structural in the way that he put it, where people would just spontaneously arise with these systems of organization where, we need housing, people will arise to find housing for everybody. We need, tractors in the countryside and food in the city. These mutual aid networks would just spontaneously arise. I'm a little less optimistic about that just spontaneously happening. I think it really does need to be guided in some formalized way. But whether or not these confederations are voluntary, or it's once you're a part of a local system, you're also part of the national system. I mean, that's the main difference between how I see communism and how I see anarchism. And neither one of them really fits with authoritarianism, unless you're talking about again, suppressing people who want to take your power. So if you want to call that authoritarian, I guess you could, but I wouldn't really. I don't think that really fits. I think it's having the least amount of authoritarianism as possible. And that's the thing that these right-wing libertarians don't understand. They think you can just do away with government, and that's the end of authoritarianism. You just, dust your hands off, government gone, everything good. Well, totally ignoring that the way that private businesses, especially large corporations, function is as authoritarian bodies. Like, I mean, you want to talk about authoritarian. When was the last time you had a say in your workplace beyond just, hey, can I have a raise? Clout, basically. You can't determine your own wages, your working times. All these things are determined by people higher up. It's a top-down authoritarian system, which ANCAPs and so-called right libertarians don't seem to understand, which is puzzling to me. So forgetting that capital markets control government decisions. Exactly. Right now we have a capitalist form of government. Or at least a government that is there to support capitalist interests. We have a bourgeois state, a state that suppresses the needs of the many for the needs of the few business owners. And what both Lenin and what anarchists want to do is turn that on its head, so that any form of state that is there going forward is suppressing the hoarders' interests, the capitalist interests, for the benefit of the common worker. Governments are proxy to the owners of capital. Absolutely. They are. And that's the way that a bourgeois state works. And that's why it's so difficult, some of these terms, such as the dictatorship of the proletariat. What that doesn't mean is that now instead of, capitalists controlling everything, that the government does instead. No, that means the people. The government is, any sort of government that is functioning for the benefit of the common worker at the expense of the former owners. It will suppress the former capitalist class for the benefit of the working class. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, you're definitely right. That's the way governments are used right now by the people that have the most say. So you say you're not a Marxist-Leninist personally, Amazing Wolf skeptic, and you don't believe in the vanguardist perspective because I think that it replaces the capital elite with their own elites. And that's the vanguardist party. That's a concept that I haven't really dove into yet. Lenin covered a whole lot of the stuff that there are misconceptions about in State and Revolution, but one thing he didn't cover was the vanguard party, or at least I don't remember him covering it. If he did, for some reason it didn't register with me. But I need to look at that concept a lot more because, from my outside perspective, as someone who myself believes in anarchism, vanguardism to me just sounds like, these are the people that are going to control it after the capitalist state has been overthrown and a worker state has been put in place. And that to me is where things get really messy and where you have the potential, like you say, for power seekers to come in and fill this vacuum and just take over. And it's meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And that's the last thing I want. I think the only way that can work is if they give power then over to the people, the dictatorship of the proletariat, however that form comes to be. So Natalie says, I would be afraid of libertarian governments and the distribution of healthcare for people, as far as I understand their ideas and goals. Yeah, libertarians. Libertarians are a strange breed. And again, I'm talking about so-called right libertarians. One of the many terms that they stole from real anarchists that and the contradiction in terms anarcho-capitalism. Yeah, in a libertarian society, like a right libertarian society, if you get sick and you don't have money, you're dead. Let's just be real. That's it. If you don't have money, you don't go to school. If you don't have money, you can never hope to own any of your own means of production. I don't understand how anyone would want to live in their ideal society. It makes no sense to me. So the Amazing Wolf Skeptic says, I think the only way for the people to get the emancipated is if the people themselves emancipate themselves, not the government, not the state. Oh, 100% on that. Any sort of revolution has to come from the people at large. It definitely can't be led by, people that have capital interests. You can't have the owner class, saying, hey, come on, let's together, working class, let's make things better, because they're just going to end up trying to control things afterward. That's one reason that I do my theory streams, is because I'm trying to get this information out to as many people as possible so that they have an idea of how a left-wing revolution, however that takes the form. I'm not even saying necessarily a violent overthrow of the government, but just however we take power away from the people that wield it now. People need to have a concept of how that can go down for it to really do well in the after. You have to have an informed body politic, basically, in order for things to function. And in order for less than scrupulous people to be prevented from just seizing power by people that, had no concept of a revolution before it happened. I think you definitely have to have a lot of people understanding how things should go so that collectively we can guard against that sort of thing happening. So you're interested, Natalie, in learning how anarchism and healthcare would work too. That's a good point. I would think that in the conception of, say, like a Kropotkin, basically it would just be, you are a doctor, you are a nurse, whatever. You, of your own free will, give your services to the people, and, in exchange, more or less, although there's no formal accounting of things, but because you are known as a doctor who helps people, then people that have resources you need will just give them to you. They'll mutual aid them to you, basically. So everyone just keeps on doing what they're doing. It's just there's no more money transactions happening. It's just a needs-based economy. And in both anarchism and communism, they conceive of things as a needs-based economy. I need, X amount of money to earn X amount of food to keep living, X amount of shelter, all these sorts of things. So, just through the mutual aid of people that have those resources, things get distributed out, and people get what they need. The farmer realizes that they need certain equipment to keep doing their farming, and so they give their food to people in the city, their excess food, and the people in the city turn around and give whatever equipment and machinery the farmer needs to them, because they can manufacture that stuff there. That's how it works in Kropotkin's anarchy. In Lenin's communism, that would be more of a formalized system of distribution, but still it's a needs-based economy, away from a monetary-based economy where, you exchange these tokens for, X amount of labor, and then you have to worry about how much labor is valued, doing one thing versus another. Do we value mental labor the same as physical labor? In this country, we definitely don't. Mental labor is always way more valued in America than physical labor. Doesn't matter how hard each of those things are. That's just how we've conceived of it. So we would be getting away from that system and just doing it on, we need workers to do this, we need workers to do that, and that sort of thing. So the Amazing Wolf Skeptic says, bread theory, Lenin was a right-wing deviation of Marxism. I don't know that I would look at it that way. I think he made a pretty good case in the State and Revolution for what he thought. How he actually governed, I don't know. I haven't gotten into that yet, but at least theoretically, I wouldn't say that he was looking at things from a right-wing perspective. He was talking about a lot of checks and balances against power and it accumulating into too few hands and always keeping the power with the people as much as possible. As stated in his book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. It's one I haven't read yet, but I will get to it eventually. So I'm not saying you're necessarily wrong. I just, as I conceive of him now, I don't see him as a right-winger of any conception. So Natalie says, back to Tiny Tim days, and the mercy of charity is what I understand of right-wing libertarian government. Absolutely. Yeah. No one can make me, work for the benefit of other people. So I get to keep all of my money because I own that sort of thing. I get the entire fruits of my labor plus labor of anyone who's made a contract with me. I get all the fruits of the labor and then just give a pittance as much as I can get away with to my workers. That's the right-wing libertarian for you. So the Amazing Wolf Skeptic says, I thought that post-anarchism was farther left than anarchism. That's a branch of anarchism I have not explored yet. So you may be right on that. I don't really know how it conceives of itself as opposed to your more mainstream, if mainstream's even the right word for it, flavors of anarchy. So I don't know. I'll just have to leave that up in the air for now. Natalie says, would you know which book of Kropotkin's is the best for understanding his views on healthcare? Well, I haven't gotten to it yet, but I would assume that mutual aid, a factor of human evolution, or is it just a factor of evolution, would be a good one to start from. I plan on covering that eventually. Otherwise, the Conquest of Bread just kind of talks about how distribution would happen post-capitalism. Gives you some broad overviews. So I understand you're saying he was the right wing of the left. I just don't know. I mean, you might be right in your conception of it, but from what I've seen so far, I would say that he's looking at really diffuse power, and that collectively it's just being used centrally to fulfill the needs of the people first and foremost. So he was a Marxist, but on the right wing of the Marxist political spectrum. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and that's fine. We can parse these small differences. But yeah, I think that's probably about all I'm gonna have time for that tangent for right now, because it is getting close to 9 o'clock, and I wanted to be done by 9, but looks like I'm gonna run over because I definitely want to finish this video. But thank you for your questions, the Amazing Wolf Skeptic. But I think we're gonna get it back on track towards homesteading right now. So he says both pigs and cows gets grazed by those animals. So this is our orchard system with the we obviously harvest fruit and also make juice. And the pigs can eat the overripe fruits, feeding them also in this design. And there's a benefit to having the pigs do that, because then they clean up the waste that bugs might otherwise, pests might otherwise reproduce in. So then when we harvest, they also eat the fruit in the autumn. So that ties in really well with the permaculture principle of produce no waste. So instead of this fruit that falls on the ground that you wouldn't otherwise harvest, maybe it's gone bad, it's fed to the pigs because they don't mind. So one thing's waste is another system's food, basically another system's input. So that's cool to see that they do that. Another example of combined land use: trees, pastures, and animals, giving additional feed to the animals as well as our crops. So this is our pig pen. The pigs are outside all year long. But with the dry shelter, as you can see, with this earth stable,
Und
where they
Tiere
can
sind ganz
stay
stark in
outside.
Freiland bzw. Weidehaltung.
Ah, so
Und
they do
zwar
have some
werden die
structures
in
for the animals.
Koppeln
That's interesting to
gehalten, die
see.
immer
It's
wieder
just a little more
gewechselt werden.
open and
Da
informal
geht's
than
darum, dass die
an
Tiere
actual
in der
barn.
Weidehaltung sich
So,
selbst
so this is a
einen
temporary
guten
space
Teil
where
des
they can
Futters
find
selbst auf die
food
Fläche
for
holen.
themselves easily.
Das bedeutet, sie kommen in eine neue Fläche,
When they arrive on
fressen
the new land, they
als
eat the
Weidetiere das
grasses.
Gras, wühlen aber natürlich
They
auch,
dig and eat
fressen die
roots and
Wurzeln,
worms
fressen aber auch
and anything
Würmer,
they can find.
Schnecken, alles was sie finden. Ja, sind auch vor tierischem Eiweiß nicht abgeneigt. Und
This is
suchen sich so
their
ihr
nature.
Futter.
Yeah, just to root around in
Und
the
dann,
ground.
ab dem Zeitpunkt, wo
And
sie
then,
den
when they
Großteil
have
schon
eaten the
gefunden,
majority of the
gefressen
food,
und durchgewühlt haben, füttern wir sie
we
durch
feed
und auch
them
noch
a
nach.
little bit,
Ja, und
and they will
damit
still
sie quasi
find
auch den
anything
Rest
else.
auch noch fressen. Und dann
Then they
kommen sie
grow
in die
into a
nächste
new
Koppel.
patch,
Und
which
so
will,
gibt's eine
or they go into a
Rotation,
new
wo
patch,
die
which will
Fläche
allow
sich
them
immer wieder
the land to
erholen kann,
regenerate.
immer wieder nachwächst.
So they're doing rotational
Und
grazing with the
das ist mit den
pigs.
Schweinen ganz ideal.
And
Was
this is the pig
sozusagen,
cycle.
der
The
eigentliche
natural
Lebensraum der
habits
Tiere ist. Denn
of
die
these
Schweine sind
animals
eigentlich
in the
Waldtiere.
forest.
Und deshalb haben wir die
Habitat
Schweine
of the
auch
animals
immer
is in the
auf
forest.
bewaldeten
And that's why we
Flächen.
keep them in these forest
wichtig.
plans of
Und
earth.
zwar erstens finden sie dort genug und
This
zweitens
is why
können sie dort
they can
keinen
find their
Schaden
own
machen. Die Schweine
food.
wühlen und
So the
sind deshalb bei uns immer auf
animals
Flächen,
dig.
die wir maschinell
Can't read the rest
sowieso
of
nicht
that one.
bearbeiten könnten. Das heißt auf Flächen, wo
They
es
cannot
keine Rolle
really
spielt,
work
wenn
any
Steine,
other
ja,
way.
sondern Schweine gehören auf
Pigs
Flächen,
belong on marginal
die
land that
eigentlich
is
nicht
less useful to
bewirtschaftbar
us.
sind. Ja, weder maschinell
Yeah, those pigs do look like they're
sonst
being
mit der
fed
Hand
well
nicht
naturally.
bewirtschaftbar
That's true.
sind. Und da sind die Schweine eine wunderschöne
So the places that they
Ergänzung.
can't work
Und man
machines,
kann
maybe it's too
Tätigkeit
steep
der
or whatever,
Schweine positiv
they-
nutzen, indem man sie quasi als Arbeitsleistung nutzt, indem man
to do
nach
useful
dem
work,
Wühlen der Schweine
incorporating
wieder einsät und
productivity,
so die Produktivität der Fläche erhöht oder
really poor
indem man
positioning
die
of
Schweine
the
verwendet,
captions.
um quasi unerwünschten Bewuchs wegzubringen. Es gibt kein anderes Tier, das
But basically,
Bewuchs
they
von einer
work where the
Fläche
people can't really work.
so
It's the most effective
so
animal for
gut entfernen
this,
kann, ja, wie Schweine.
for that sort of thing, is the pig. Yeah, he does look like a good, happy pig. Aw.
Okay, was wir hier
What we
sehen,
see here is a good example
Ein,
of an
gutes Beispiel
agroforestry system.
ein agroforstwirtschaftliches System. Und zwar ist es ein System, das wir in Form eines
We combine
einer Kombination
level
der
terraces, so they're doing the terracing
und
again,
eines quasi
and
Mittelwaldes
banks that are
aufgebaut haben. Und da
forested.
geht's, jetzt darum,
On the
auf den
terraces, we
Terrassen
grow
wird
crops,
Landwirtschaft betrieben und
and on
die
the
Böschungen
banks,
der
we
Terrassen
secure
werden
the
mit Bäumen
soil with
gesichert.
the trees.
Aber um da eine Mehrfachnutzung
In
reinzubringen,
order
braucht man ein
to
spezielles System
add
vom Wald.
functional
Das ist
uses,
eben eine Art Mittelwald. Um das kurz zu erklären, diese
mimicking
Böschungen
the
dienen
mid-succession.
dazu, Holz bzw. Früchte,
Well, we have produced
ja,
fruit
so kleine
trees,
Obstbäume
well, we have
sind
produced
oder
fruit trees and timber
Sträucher, Früchte
trees,
zu produzieren. Gleichzeitig
which yield a
müssen
harvest
die Bäume
and
die
secure
Fläche
the ground
sichern,
at the same
ja,
time. So
den
they're doing multiple
Böschung sichern, weil
functions.
es ist ja doch ein sehr steiles Gelände und dürfen aber trotzdem nicht den
So it's very
Terrassen
steep.
zu viel nehmen, dass der Anbau oder die
I guess the
Produktivität
trees
auf der Fläche
are still
sinkt.
okay though.
Deshalb muss es ein sehr lichtes
Oh,
Waldsystem sein,
closed captioning.
das
They should have done
landwirtschaftlich
this so
genutzt
much
wird
better.
und das auch quasi immer ein bisschen gepflegt wird. Wir haben das so aufgebaut, dass es eine Kombination ist aus
So the
Fruchtbäumen
design
und
with
Sträuchern,
different
wie
height
zum Beispiel
layers.
Hier dieser Holunder oder hier die Vogelbeeren. Ja? Zum Teil
Fruit
sind
trees
andere
between
Obstbäume
the timber
dazwischen
trees and
dann
other
wieder
bushes.
einzelnen Bäumen, die fürs Holz dienen, wie es hier diese Lärchen sind oder die Birken. Und der Aufwuchs dazwischen
And
wird
then
regelmäßig
they grow in
für
between
Brennholz
as a
gefällt.
harvest
Und
for
diese einzelnen
food, I guess.
Fruchtbäume oder Bäume
the
fürs
valuable
Bauholz
timbers are
oder
also
Wertholz
in
lässt man
stand
stehen
and harvest when they are
und die
needed.
erntet man dann, wenn man dieses Holz benötigt. Die Böschungen werden ansonsten zum Teil auch beweidet,
And they graze
beziehungsweise
between
das aufwachsende
and
andere
harvest
Holz
kindling also.
wird
So they get kindling
als
from it
Energieholz, als
and
Brennholz
graze land.
dazwischen gefällt. So hat man immer genügend
This is
Licht
how we
für
maintain
die
the light
Terrassen, auf denen man
on
anbaut,
the
auf denen
terraces.
man anbaut. Einerseits, ja,
So
man
we
hat
have
das Obst
fruits,
zum Teil,
timber,
man hat
fuel.
das Nutzholz als Mehrfachnutzung, man hat die Hangstabilisierung,
And the slope is
ganz
being
wesentlich, und
stabilized.
man hat natürlich auch das
So
Energieholz.
again, integrating rather than
Die Terrassen haben
segregating.
die
Another
Mehrfachnutzung,
huge
dass man
permaculture
sie
principle.
im Winter
So
sozusagen
for this
als
is
Wege
either
zur Holzernte nutzen kann und sind somit auch die Erschließung,
didn't
um
catch
das Holz
that
zu
part.
ernten.
Sorry.
Okay, was man hier
Harvesting
sieht,
wood.
ist
In
Prinzip
principle, this is the
dasselbe
same system
nur dass es in
in a
einer
different
etwas
stage of
anderen
development. So you see the bushes have
Entwicklungsphase,
grown
in
up a
einem
little
anderen
bit.
Entwicklungsstadium. Das ist jetzt genau die
Here
Phase, wo
is
sich
an
das
earlier stage of succession.
verjüngt, hat, wo man
And we just
jetzt
decide what
entscheidet,
stays
was
or what
bleibt.
goes.
Ja, man hat hier die einzelnen Birken, man hat hier den Holunder.
The pioneer trees are growing of their own accord.
Das heißt, da ist kein
We're
Baum
not
gepflanzt.
planting
Und
anything.
das ist eigentlich das Schöne an dem
So
System.
again, you see nature just performing the
Man
services
gibt dem
for
Wald
them
quasi diese
for free.
Verjüngungsphase, also dieser Böschung-
This pioneer
Verjüngungsphase,
stage
wo
is
sich
where
die
we
Bäume
chose
und Sträucher
what we want in the
verjüngen,
system.
ja, wo sie aufwachsen und dann wählt man aus, was möchte man im System behalten und was nicht. Lege ich jetzt mehr Wert auf das Holz?
Do I
lege ich
want
mehr
timber
Wert,
or fruits?
auf die Frucht und so? Geht man in eine gewisse Richtung oder welches Holz
And so
möchte
we
ich,
guide
welche
the
Bäume
development.
fördere ich, welche nehme ich weg. Das System an sich ist ja sehr alt. Diese
In this way,
Mittelwaldbewirtschaftung
it's
gehört
a
zu den
very
ersten
ancient technique
Waldbewirtschaftungen, die es gab und wurde im Mittelalter
implemented
großflächig
in our
angewendet.
past
Nur
in a big way.
leider in den letzten, im letzten
It seems to
Jahrhundert
have been forgotten over the
hauptsächlich
last
einfach ein
100
bisschen in
years.
Vergessenheit geraten. Ist aber die ideale Bewirtschaftung gerade
But this
für
is the
Terrassen
ideal
und
utilization of this
Steilgelände,
steep land,
weil man die Bäume unbedingt
where
braucht,
trees
um
are
die
essential
Böschungen
to
zu
hold the
sichern.
soil,
Man braucht hier die Bewurzelung. Und man kann
all
mit
with
den
good
Bäumen
productivity.
auf dem Hang plötzlich Produktivität schaffen. Weil ich habe ja, wenn ich eine Terrasse habe, ansonsten nur die Terrasse.
If only I had a terrace, production,
Und so
I
erhöhe
didn't
ich die
catch that part.
Produktivität, schaffe
But
Stabilität.
here we increase the
Und
productivity,
hab einen
stability, and
wunderbaren
function of the land.
Mehrfachnutzen.
Also, if it was only a terrace, you'd only have one function for it. But there's many things
Also,
going
man
on
sieht's
at the
jetzt
same
der
time.
Fläche fast nicht an,
It's
aber
hard
wir
to see the
haben hier,
terrace
ich hab's schon
above,
gesehen, oben eine Terrasse mit Kartoffeln. Hier ist wieder
but
eine
there
Terrasse,
is one with
die
potato,
momentan,
one
dieses
with
Jahr rastet,
that's
wo ja
lying
nichts
fallow,
angebaut wird. Hier ist der Weg runter, hier meine
and this
Terrasse
one is for access between
mit dem Getreide.
the
Man sieht
below
der
one
Fläche
with
jetzt an,
rye.
es sieht fast
It
so
looks
aus,
like a
als wäre man quasi
forest
im
a
Wald,
bit,
und ist
and
auch
it
ein
is like that.
Waldsystem. Ja? Mittelwaldsystem,
It's more like a
Anbau
mid-succession
dazwischen.
forest.
Man sieht es ja also nicht an, man hat das Gefühl, man steht im Wald, aber trotzdem baue ich allein auf dieser Fläche
Yet with the feeling with this
mehr
feeling, we can still
Kartoffeln und mehr
produce more
Getreide an,
potatoes
wie es hier
and
in
grain than our neighbors do.
zum Beispiel
Wow,
Nachbarn
that's
macht,
that's
weil es
incredible.
einfach daran, weil
But mostly
keiner
because
mehr
people
trampelt, das heißt,
don't
es geht
believe it
nicht
is
um das
possible on this land.
Wir haben ja schon
We
über
already
über
talked
das
about the
Thema,
water systems.
Teichsysteme gesprochen und das ist hier auch ein ganz gutes Beispiel. Wir
Here's a
haben
good
hier,
example of our
mehrere
ponds on
Teiche
different
in
levels.
Etagen aufgebaut. Man sieht, es kommt da hinten das Wasser vom oberen
The water is
Teich
constantly
herunter,
flowing down to
in
each
den
pond.
herein. Von dem Teich hier ist die Möglichkeit, ihn
And here we
auszuleiten.
have a pipe
Sieht da
connecting the
dieses Rohr,
ponds.
diesen Mönch. Und hier das Überwasser geht wieder
And an
über den
overflow
offenen
trench
Graben
here.
hinunter in den nächsten Teich. Man versucht im Übrigen auch ganz
Overflow is an important aspect.
wichtige Sache. Und zwar geht es da darum, dass wir das Wasser
It regenerates
immer
the
wieder
water. It oxygenates it.
regenerieren müssen. Und nicht müssen, sondern
You
das
don't
sollte
have
man
to,
einfach, ja?
but one should.
Und es geht da im Prinzip
In
darum,
principle,
dass
we
man
want
sagt,
to hold the
man hebt
water
das Wasser so
in
lange
the
wie
landscape
möglich, nützt es
using multiple
mehrfach über verschiedene
times.
Teiche, muss dem
And so
Wasser
we must
aber
try
dann auch
to
die Möglichkeit zur
regenerate the water.
Regeneration geben. Ja, ich kann jetzt nicht mehrere Teiche hintereinander schalten und
You
die alle
cannot keep using
intensiv
it
nutzen, sondern ich muss dem auch
intensively without this.
Regenerationsmöglichkeiten geben. Das heißt, unsere Teichsysteme sind immer so
So the
aufgebaut,
systems has
dass wir
different
Teiche
uses.
haben, die wir intensiver nutzen und dann wieder Teiche haben dazwischen, die
For
quasi
growing
wie
yields or
äh,
cleansing plants.
Pflanzen- oder Biokläranlagen das Wasser regenerieren.
So we can
Geht's jetzt gar nicht
oxygenate and
Klären
regulate
an
in
sich, sondern einfach
the
ums
water.
Anreichern mit Sauerstoff, ums quasi ja, als Lebensraum
And
für
allow
Mikroorganismen
microorganisms
und so
to
weiter,
grow
ums einfach
and get ready for
das
the
Wasser wieder
next pond.
vorzubereiten für den nächsten Teich. Und ganz ein wesentlicher
So this is
Bereich
really an
ist
important
diese,
space.
diese offenen Gerinne. Ja? Wenn hier das Wasser
And
über
the
diese
water
Steine
goes over
fließt
these
und diesen kleinen
stones,
Bachlauf entlang, dann reichert sich so Sauerstoff an, dann regeneriert sich
it's
und ist
regenerated,
der Teich schon
ready
wieder
for the next
verfügbar
pond.
bereit.
It's
Das
very
ist ganz
important.
wichtig. Und wir versuchen das
Enforce
Systemen auch immer
the
verstärkt
land
zu
between
machen.
the
Also wir haben
ponds.
Teichsysteme, danach gibt es nach
After
jedem
every
Teichsystem,
5 or
das
6
aus 5,
ponds,
6 Teichen besteht, gibt es Teiche, die wir schauen
there are
uns das von
ponds
oben noch
totally
an,
full
voll
of
mit
water
Wasserpflanzen
plants.
bewachsen sind, ja, die wirklich als natürliche Flachzone das
And
Wasser
flat zones
sozusagen,
clear
auch
the
wieder
water.
klären. Und danach geht das
And
Wasser
then
über einen natürlichen
as it
Bachlauf
cascades down this rocky ditch to the
erst
next
wieder weiter
pond,
und dann erst wieder in den nächsten Teich. Und zwischen
Between
den
the
Teichsystemen
ponds,
sind
the
diese
ditches are
Bachläufe
long.
sogar noch wesentlich länger. Ja? Das sind sie
sometimes
zum
up to
Teil,
100 meters long.
ja, 100 Meter lang. Ja? Die gehen dann wieder in den nächsten Teich hinein und sind dann
So regenerated water enters the next pond,
Wasser,
and it's
Wasser ist dann wieder
perfectly,
perfekt für den nächsten Teich. Das heißt, wir können
and it's
mit
in a
diesem
perfect
ganz
condition.
einfachen Trick haben wir trotz
even with the high
der
use, water
vielfachen
quality is
Nutzung des
maintained.
Wassers immer eine sehr gute Wasserqualität. Und das ist bei uns dann
This is
möglich,
important
weil
as
man
we have
eben
limited
relativ wenig
amount of
Wasser zur
water.
Verfügung hat. Das ist eine Sache, die man sich auch überlegen muss.
See beneath it.
Also auch das
You have to
etwas
decide to
hergeben
let
oder etwas
something
regenerieren lassen.
go or regenerate
Durch
it.
diese Teigsysteme ist man
With the
eben auch
system
in der
you
Lage,
are in a
diese
position to
Struktur
use,
und diese ganzen unterschiedlichen
different structures
sozusagen
according to
Bereiche,
needs.
die man braucht, ja, auch
So
wirklich,
that really works.
dass die wirklich
So
funktionieren,
dividing up the
ja, dass
water
man wirklich
helps
aufteilen kann,
like
auch vertikal am Hang.
on these
Und das kann man
banks,
mit
I
diesen
think.
Teichsystemen
So you can
machen.
do something with
Flachzonen,
these
ja,
flat zones,
Flachbereiche, dann wieder die produktiveren Teiche,
the
dann
deep
wieder
waters
offene
and the
Bäche
more open
und wieder
areas.
in den
This is
nächsten
the
Teich
advantage
kommen. Das
of
ist ein
ponds on
Riesenvorteil,
slope.
wenn man Teichsysteme am Hang hat.
You get a lot of
Hier sieht man
versatility,
eben
what he's
diesen
saying,
Bad.
basically.
Und hier sieht man
Here you see the
auch die
ditch,
Möglichkeit bei diesem Teich, wie man das Wasser
and with this pond, the potential to regulate the
regulieren
flow.
kann. Das ist ganz wesentlich. Also ich muss ja meine Teiche, wenn ich sie befischen will,
If I want to
auch
have fish, I need to
befischbar
make the
machen, ja?
right conditions.
und je mehr
The
Struktur der
more
Teich
water
hat,
in the
umso
pond,
schwieriger ist es, die
the
Fische zu
harder it
fangen.
is to catch the fish.
Aber wenn ich die Teiche
But if we
regulieren
can
kann,
take the
indem
water
ich
out
das
of
Wasser quasi
the pond,
ableiten kann, dann funktioniert das sehr gut.
it
Und wir
makes
machen
it
das
all
ein
a
bisschen
lot
nachher. Ich werde es
easier.
dann gleich demonstrieren, wie das funktioniert. Der wichtige Punkt dabei ist auch, dass ich das Wasser nicht
And I
verliere,
don't
weil ich
lose the
dann
water,
wieder
it
einen
goes
Teich
to the
habe, der
next
mir dieses
pond.
Wasser auffängt. Das heißt, das kann ich auch mit einem Teichsystem machen. Ich verliere nie was. Ich verliere nie Biomasse.
I want to use it
Ja.
again
Bis auf den
until
letzten Teich
I get
natürlich,
to the
ja, wenn
last
ich den
pond.
auslassen würde, aber im gesamten System darüber kann ich alles an Wasser immer wieder auffangen, aber auch das ganze Wasserleben, das ganze Plankton
crayfish,
oder auch
plankton,
kleine
etc.,
Krebse,
I
was
never
auch immer ich
lose
da
out of the
Wasser drinnen
system.
habe, fange ich auf und ich verliere es nie. Und ich kann im Gegenzug,
If I'm
wenn ich
emptying
einen
one pond, I
Teich
can also
zwischen
fill it from the one
absenke,
above.
ihn sofort mit Wasser aus dem nächsten Teich wieder füllen. Das heißt, ich habe immer ganz schnell
Water
Wasser
can
zur
always be
Verfügung
readily available.
und auch in großen Mengen, auch
In
wenn
big
ich
quantities,
über die
despite
Quellen nur
the
wenig
small
Wasser
amount of spring flow.
in kurzer Zeit
It's
verfügbar
available
habe,
quickly
kann ich
if
immer
needed.
dieses Teichsystem sehr einfach machen. Und dadurch habe ich auch nie das Problem, dass mir
A
zum
potential
Beispiel
problem with the
hier mein
pond
ganzes
floor
Teichbodenleben
life
nach
can
einem
be avoided by
Abfischen irgendwie
refilling the
schaden
ponds quickly.
weil ich senke kurz ab, fange meine Fische und lasse sofort innerhalb kürzester Zeit den Teich wieder voll. Ich brauche nur vom oberen Teich ein bisschen was absenken und der untere
It's
ist schon
really
wieder so weit
important to
gefüllt, dass
have
ich das
this
Ich
control.
werde das jetzt kurz demonstrieren, weil das ist ganz eine wichtige Sache.
Here
Wie das
I can demonstrate
funktioniert, weil
how
damit
we
gewährleistet
move
ist, dass
water
die Fische
without the
nicht
fish getting away.
quasi über diese Rohre mitschwimmen können, wenn ich es nicht will. Und weil wir da oben nur immer ein kleiner Wasserfilm drüber
By one
läuft
taking water from the
deshalb-
top level,
und ich immer nur das Wasser von der Oberfläche abziehe. Und das ist ganz wesentlich. Ich zeige das kurz.
or by only taking water from the top level. So he just moves it a little bit down underneath the water level, and now it's sucking out water from the surface. And now it's going into the next pond.
Das System ganz
The system is very simple.
denn es ist im Prinzip nichts anderes als ein Rohr.
It's a flexible pipe with a 9-degree bend.
90-Grad-Bogen und Standrohren drauf. Und wenn man das richtig verbaut,
If
ohne
you
dass man es
build it
fixiert,
properly with a
mit
flexible
guter
arm,
Dichtung, dann lässt sich das ganz einfach schwenken und man kann Zentimeter
you can regulate the flow very easily.
Stand regulieren.
So like, the more he puts it down into the water, the faster the flow, basically.
Weil es
We like it as
Das ist eigentlich das
it is
Schöne.
easy and quick.
It would be so hard to do this farm justice in a little film. I mean, the systems here are so complex and so well established that to an untrained eye, it just is too difficult to explain what is going on all the different levels. But even so, it's clearly such a beautiful and functional space, creating and utilizing microclimates in a brilliant example of understanding landscape, like these bare rock faces 1400 meters above sea level, being used to grow tender vegetables because of the extra heat they absorb
Using that
in an
heat
alpine
sink
mountain
effect.
climate. There's things going on here
cool.
that just shouldn't be happening from a conventional viewpoint. And it's pure testimony to reading the landscape and integrating various design ideas into a cohesive and really well-functioning whole system.
Sheet mulching has been a
All
thing
right, we'll
that
get
people...
to sheet mulching next time. Okay, so that's a really brief overview of what Sepp Holzer does. I think there maybe is a website associated with him. I think seppholzer.com or .org or something. We'll look it up right now and I'll put it in the chat. Let's see if it's a .com. Oh no, it's a .at, I guess. Well, here's another one. Here's one that's devoted. Oh, that says not secure. I won't give you that one. Let's try this one. seppholzer.at. So this will give you a little more information about him. Oh wait, here, this is just a splash point. Or a landing pad, I guess, whatever you call it. It's not the site itself. Let's look up holzerecology.com. Let's see if that brings us where we need to go. Well, this will give you at least another place to look at if you're interested in learning more about Sepp Holzer. Good night, Season Minis. Good to have you on the stream. Thanks for all your questions and everything. Thanks for being a part of this. So there you go. Interested more about Sepp Holzer, you can check that out. That's going to do it for tonight's stream, I would say. Thank you all for coming with me on this journey and learning a little bit more about permaculture as we work our way through this playlist, as I get you acclimated to the wide world of permaculture. Hopefully you found this useful to whatever sort of organizing that you're doing yourself. Yeah, even if you're not planning on doing a homestead, there's a lot of principles that can apply. All the different permaculture principles can be used just as easily inside a small apartment as they could in a large homestead, and everything in between. So I think that's the main strength of permaculture. It's very scalable and adaptable to basically whatever your imagination comes up with. So yeah, so once again, on Wednesday, we'll be starting The ABC of Anarchism, also known as What is Anarcho-Communism by Alexander Berkman. And so I hope to see you all for that. In the meantime, for those of you joining me, you're quite welcome. Natalie, thanks for joining me again. For those of you on Twitch, we're going to raid into somebody right now. So I will find who's on right now. So we're going to pick someone with not many people right now. Zamudi. I think Zamudi was even in here earlier. So let's do Zamudi. Raid into them. So, for those of you not on Twitch, if you're interested in finding out another cool leftist streamer on Twitch, go ahead and follow that link. And that is the person we'll be raiding into shortly. All right, so thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time. Probably doing some more permaculture next weekend as well.